The alarm had been screaming for 9 minutes, and in that time the thing in the paddock had thrown a half-ton restraint sled 40 feet, bent the inner barrier into a shape the engineers would later refuse to explain, and driven the last certified handler on Hesk Station out through the safety gate on his hands and knees. Ostwin Dreed watched it from the observation gallery, with a stylus he had forgotten he was holding. He was an archivist. He was not supposed to be here. His whole function at the wardency was to sit in a climate-sealed office 2 levels up and record dispositions, intake weights, feed logs, the tidy paperwork of death and containment. He had come down only because the duty roster had a hole in it, and someone with clean credentials needed to log the morning's proceedings. And now he stood pressed to the armored glass, while the largest living animal he had ever seen tried to take the room apart with its shoulders. The beast was called Subject 9. That was the only name it had. The species designation was longer and colder, an apex ambush predator out of the deep valleys of Voth, a heavy world where the gravity pulled at a man's marrow, and the things that survived did so by being the last thing the valley ever heard. 9 stood the height of 2 Sethari at the shoulder, hunched forward on 6 thick limbs, hide the gray of wet slate over a knotwork of muscle that moved in slabs. It had no eyes a person could find comfortable. It had a jaw that opened wider than seemed structurally honest, and when it opened that jaw now and put its full voice into the dome, the sound came up through the floor and into Dreed's back teeth. Below, Warden Marshal Ith Corvin was shouting for the gate to be sealed. Dreed made a note. He did it because making notes was the only thing his hands knew how to do when he was afraid, and he was afraid. The note said, 847, Subject 9, Containment Breach Class 2, no casualties. He looked at the word casualties. He crossed out Class 2 and wrote Class 3, then looked again at the barrier's new shape and left it. Get the gallery cleared, Corvin called up. He had not looked up. He never looked up at anyone. Corvin was old for a warden and unbroken by it, a slab of a man in the black and brass of the beastward corps, and he ran the Hesk holdfast the way a river runs a canyon slowly, without argument, wearing everything down. Archivist, off the glass. This is not a viewing. The disposition requires a witness of record, Dreed said, which was true and which he hated saying because it kept him there. Warden Marshal, I'm required to log the. Then log it from the door. Dreed did not move to the door. He would think about that later, the small stubborn thing in him that had planted his boots and kept them planted. At the time it did not feel like courage. It felt like the way you cannot look away from a thing that is deciding whether to end you. 9 turned in the paddock. It moved wrong for its size. That was the detail nobody in the reports ever managed to convey, a body that huge should have been slow, and it was not slow. It flowed. It went from the far wall to the near barrier in a beat and a half and hit the reinforced post with the flat of one forelimb, and the post rang like a struck bell, and shivered a fine dust of ferrocrete down onto the 2 wardens who had not yet made it to the gate. They made it to the gate. The alarm kept screaming. Somewhere a klaxon was calling the emergency handlers, though the emergency handlers were already down here and had already failed, and were being helped out one at a time with their harnesses hanging off them like shed skin. This was the 4th incident in 11 days. Dreed knew that because he had filed the other 3. He knew, also, the thing the reports did not say in the summary line but said plainly in the appendices if you read them, which nobody did except archivists. That Subject 9 had been at Hesk for 206 days, that in that time it had been handled by a rotating staff of certified wardens, that it had put 2 of them in the infirmary and 1 into a longer kind of leave, and that the recommendation attached to the last incident, signed by Corvin himself, contained a single word in the disposition field. The word was terminate. They had not done it yet. That was the thing Dreed did not understand and would spend the rest of the day coming to understand. A war beast that could not be handled was a war beast that got put down. The Corps did not keep animals it could not use, and it did not keep animals that hurt its people. 9 should have been dead a month ago. Instead, there was a stay order, and the stay order had come from above Corvan, from the wardency itself, and the wardency's reason was money. 9 had cost a great deal of money. Voth apexes did not breed in captivity, could not be replaced, and the last 3 that the Corps had successfully broken to the saddle had turned the tide of 2 border actions apiece. A working 9 was worth a squadron. A dead 9 was worth an inquiry, a write-down, and a very uncomfortable conversation with the accountants who funded the war. So the wardency had done the thing large institutions do when they cannot decide between a solution that is expensive and a solution that is embarrassing. They had called for experts. "They're inbound," said the woman at the console below, a thin gray-skinned Sethari named Present Vask whose job Dreed had never fully understood. First transport made dome contact. Ryder Exalt's party is behind them by a quarter shift. Corvan said nothing. He stood at the barrier with his hands folded behind his back, and he looked at 9 the way a man looks at a debt. Dreed made another note because he could not help it. The note said, 6 specialists requested per wardency directive, arriving over the next 2 shifts, to assess and resolve the subject 9 matter prior to any final disposition. He read it back, 6 specialists. He thought of the 2 wardens with the ferrocrete dust in their collars, both of them among the best the Corps had, both of them just carried out. He thought of the word in the disposition field. He did not yet know that the answer to all of it was standing 40 meters away with a mop. Her name was Wren Calloway, and she was, by every metric the wardency kept, the least important person in the building. Dreed would learn her name later. On that first morning she was only a shape at the edge of his attention, one of the Terran auxiliaries the holdfast contracted for the work no Sethari with rank would touch. The mucking, the slop-hauling, the drainage, the scrubbing of things that could not be named in polite company. There were 9 of them on the Hess contract, humans off a colony ship that had put in for repairs and never quite left, and the Corps used them the way it used any cheap tool it did not have to explain to. She was small. That was the first true thing about her, and it stayed true no matter what else got added on top. Small and unremarkable, a young woman somewhere in her early 20s with a plain flat face and pale eyes and brown hair shoved up under a work cap, dressed in the gray coverall the auxiliaries wore, which the Corps issued in exactly one size and which fit none of them. She had a mop and a wheeled reservoir, and she was cleaning the drainage channel that ran along the outside of the paddock service corridor. And she was doing it while an apex predator hammered the barrier 8 meters from her head, and she had not once looked up. That was the detail Dreed would remember. He was up in the gallery gripping a stylus hard enough to leave a mark in his palm, and the seasoned wardens were being helped out on their knees, and the small human woman with the mop was working the channel with long, even strokes, and she had not once looked up. At the time he thought she simply did not understand the danger. He was an archivist. He understood danger the way most people understood it, as a thing you read about and filed. He assumed she was the same, dumber if anything, too ignorant to be afraid. He was wrong about that the way he was wrong about most of it. She had looked up. She had looked up in the first 30 seconds, taken the measure of the whole scene, the beast, the barrier, the men, the distance, the drain, and having taken the measure of it, had gone back to her channel. Because the barrier would hold, and the men were on the wrong side of it doing the wrong things, and the drain would not clean itself, and none of it was hers. She had a dog with her. Dreed did not notice the dog that morning. Nobody noticed the dog. It was lying in the shade of the reservoir cart with its chin on its paws, a medium animal, black and white, unremarkable, watching the whole affair through half-closed eyes and not moving at all. The dog had noticed everything. The Rider Exalt arrived at midday, and he arrived the way weather arrives. Barath Ostmund was the first of the six, and he had insisted on being first, because a man does not build a reputation like Ostmund's by going second. He came down the transport ramp already talking, a broad, high-plated Sethari in the crimson leathers of the steppe traditions, flanked by two aides carrying gear he would not deign to carry himself, and he crossed the receiving floor toward Corvin with his hand already out and his voice already filling the space. "Warden Marshal. Ith Corvin, I read your files on the transit in." He clasped Corvin's forearm in the steppe grip, which Corvin returned without warmth. "A tragedy of method. You've had this animal 200 days and you've been managing it. One does not manage a Voth apex. One rides it or one does not touch it. There is no third road." "There is a third road," Corvin said. "It's in the disposition field." Ostmund laughed. It was a large, generous, practiced laugh, and it did not reach the flat black of his eyes. "The paperwork road, yes, I've read that word too. That word is why I'm here, to make it unnecessary." He turned, scanning the dome, the barrier, the gray shape pacing behind it. He looked at Nine the way Dreed imagined a buyer looks at a horse, or the way a certain kind of man looks at any obstacle, as a thing that exists to be gotten over. "There," he said softly. "There it is. Beautiful, they always are the difficult ones. You know why it's difficult, Warden Marshal? Because everyone who's touched it has asked it a question. Your wardens. The animal has been asked its whole life whether it will submit, and it keeps saying no." He rolled his shoulders inside the crimson leather. "I don't ask." Dreed had come down from the gallery to log the arrival. He stood at the periphery with his slate and he wrote, "Rider Exalt B. Ostmund, arrival 1204. And then he stopped writing and simply listened, because it was rare to hear a man believe in himself so completely and out loud. "You'll want the arena cleared," Ostmund told Corvin, though it was Corvin's arena. "My aides and I, no one else on the floor. An audience makes the animal proud, and a proud animal fights the wrong things. I need it thinking about me and nothing else." Corvin's jaw worked. He was a man used to being the largest authority in any room he entered, and Ostmund had walked into his holdfast and taken that from him in under 2 minutes, and both of them knew it. But the directive from the wardency was clear, and the directive said the specialists were to be given the floor. So Corvin gave the order, and the wardens withdrew, and the observation gallery filled instead, because the same directive that cleared the floor had made the whole holdfast curious. Dreed took a place at the glass. He noticed, without weighing it, that the Terran auxiliaries had been pulled off the paddock corridor along with everyone else, herded up into a service alcove off the gallery where they could be kept out of the way. The small woman was among them. Her mop stood in its bucket, the dog at her heel now, sitting, watching the floor. On the floor, Ostmund shed his aids and his outer leathers, and walked to the inner gate alone. He was, Dreed had to admit, magnificent to watch. Everything about the man was built for exactly this. He moved onto the paddock apron with a rolling, weight-forward gait, low and loose, and he carried a single tool, a short goad, a meter of dense black wood banded in metal, the traditional instrument of the steppe riders, and he carried it like a man carries something he has never once needed to use. He stopped 10 meters from Nine and he stood, and he let the animal see him, and he began to speak to it in a low, continuous rumble in a language Dreed did not know, old steppe, the cadence of it like stones turning in a slow river. Nine stopped pacing. A sound went through the gallery, an intake of breath from 40 throats. Nine had not stopped for anyone in 200 days. It stood and it turned its great head, and it fixed the rider Exalt with that eyeless attention. And for a long moment the dome was silent, except for the low, rolling voice of the man who did not ask. "See," Ostmund said, not to Nine, to the room, though he could not have known how well the gallery pickups carried. "See, it's listening. It has never been spoken to as an equal, only commanded, only feared. Watch." He took a step, then another. He kept the rumble going, low and constant, and he closed the 10 meters to 8, to 6, and Nine held, tracking him, and Dreed realized he had stopped breathing and made himself start again. Up in the service alcove, the small human woman had come to the front of the group. She was watching the floor with an expression Dreed could not read from across the gallery, not fear, not the greedy fascination on the Sethari faces around her. Something closer to the look a person gives a slow-motion accident they can see the shape of before it finishes. At her heel the dog had risen from its sit. It stood very still, its weight forward, its ears up, and it was not looking at the man. It was looking at the beast. Ostmund reached 4 meters. He lifted the goad, not to strike, to present, a slow ceremonial rise of the black wood into Nine's line of attention, the old gesture, the offering of the instrument that meant I am the one who holds this now. In the steppe traditions, the animal that accepted the goad accepted the rider. It was said the great mounts of the old lords had lowered their heads to it. Dreed had filed the ethnographic report. He remembered the phrase, the beast that takes the goad takes the man. Nine took the goad. It happened so fast that the gallery's collective flinch came half a second late. A room full of people jerking back from armored glass at a thing that had already finished. Nine's head dropped, not in submission, in a strike, the whole slate-gray mass of it dropping and driving forward, and the goad and most of the arm that held it went somewhere Dreed's eye could not follow. And then Ostmund was 10 meters back across the apron and down, and his aides were through the gate, and the alarm was screaming again, and the great animal stood over the place where the rider exalt had been and put its voice into the dome so that the glass hummed. They got him out. That was the mercy of it, the thing Dreed wrote in the log with a hand that would not quite steady. No casualties. Ostmund lived. He would keep the arm, the physician said later, though he would not keep the full use of it, and he would certainly not keep the thing he had walked in with, the absolute unquestioned belief that a difficult animal was only an animal that had not yet met him. He was carried past the service alcove on a stretcher, gray-faced, silent for the first time since his ramp had lowered. Dreed happened to be looking that way. He saw the small human woman step back to let the stretcher pass, and he saw her glance down at the rider exalt as he went by, and there was no cruelty in her face and no triumph, only a kind of tired recognition, the look of someone watching a thing happen that they had known was going to happen and had not been asked about. Beside her the dog sat back down. Corvin stood on the empty floor with his hands folded behind him and looked at Nine, and Nine looked back, and neither of them moved for a long time. 1, Corvin said to no one, 5 to go. The second expert did not believe in touching the animal at all. Physician Adept Semel Dra arrived on the evening transport with a cargo module the size of a supply skiff, and by the following morning she had converted the paddock's environmental gallery into something between a pharmacy and a shrine. Dra was not Sethari. She was Wesson, a small hunched being with a soft gray skin and too many fingers and a voice like wind through a reed, and she had spent a long career doing to the nervous systems of dangerous animals what the Corps preferred not to think about too closely. She did not ride, she did not command, she reduced. Every behavior is chemistry, she told the assembled wardens, and Dreed, at the back with his slate, wrote it down because it had the ring of a thing that would matter later. The rider exalt made a category error. He treated fear as pride and pride as a thing you can outwill, but there is no pride. There is only a cascade threat signal hormone muscle. Interrupt the cascade and the behavior cannot occur. It is not a matter of persuading the animal. It is a matter of making the animal chemically incapable of the response. She spread her many fingers. I do not fight the flood. I close the valve. It was, Dreed thought, a beautiful theory, and it had the great advantage of never once requiring Dra to be in the same room as the animal. She worked from the environmental gallery, behind 2 barriers and a blast shield, and she worked for a day and a half before she touched the delivery control, and the day and a half was the impressive part. Dreed spent most of it up in his own office pretending to file, and coming down to the gallery whenever he could invent a reason. He watched Dra build her model. She had the 200 days of incident logs, his logs, and she read them the way he read a manifest, extracting from each violent event a number, a rate, a curve. She reconstructed Nine's metabolism from the feed records and the waste analysis and the recovery times between incidents. She calculated and recalculated and adjusted for the heavy world biology, the redundant organs, the deep valley chemistry that had evolved to survive things that would drop a Sethari where it stood. The margin is narrow, she admitted to Corvin on the second morning with the delivery system primed. This is not a domestic creature. Its tolerance is extraordinary. To reach true sedation, I must go very close to the ceiling, but the ceiling is known. The mathematics are sound. She touched the console with two of her soft fingers, gentle, almost fond. I will bring it down slow. It will feel warmth, then wait, then sleep. It will not even understand that it is being closed. Corvin looked at the gray shape in the paddock, which was, for once still. Nine had spent the night pacing a rut into the floor and had gone quiet near dawn, standing with its head low, its sides working. And then it is an animal that sleeps when I wish it to sleep and wakes when I wish it to wake. And while it sleeps, your engineers fit the harness that the rider Exalt could not, and it wakes already wearing its life. It will never fight, Warden Marshal, because it will never be awake to fight. She began the delivery. Chemistry does not negotiate. Dreed did not have the training to read the numbers scrolling up Dra's board. But he had filed 200 days of appendices, and there was one appendix, from day 30, an intake footnote that no one had flagged because it changed no disposition, that had lodged in his memory the way small strange facts sometimes lodge. The footnote recorded that Subject 9, on arrival, had metabolized the standard transit sedative in roughly a third of the projected time, and had been dosed a second time, and had metabolized that too, and had eventually been transported not sedated but merely exhausted, having been allowed to spend itself against the walls of the transport cradle until it could no longer stand. He almost said something. He was an archivist at the back of a gallery, and the being at the console had a career longer than his whole life, and the appendix was on day 30 and it was now day 209, and surely she had accounted for it. Surely the reduction curve she had built from his own logs already contained the fact that the animal ate poison for a living. He told himself this. He said nothing. He would think about that too later. The delivery ran for 40 minutes. Nine's head sank lower. Its side slowed. On Dra's board a curve bent gently downward toward a line she had drawn in advance, the ceiling, the number past which no animal came back, and she throttled the flow to hold just beneath it, patient, closing the valve a fraction at a time. In the gallery the Sethari murmured. It was working. The impossible animal was going down like a sunset. Down in the service corridor, Dreed only knew this because he pieced it together afterward, from where the auxiliaries had been posted that day. The small human woman had stopped mopping. She had gone still at her cart, watching the animal through the service grill, and the dog at her heel had stood up, and both of them had done a thing that no one on the gallery did. They had watched the animal instead of the board. The gallery watched Dra's beautiful curve bend toward its line. The woman watched the way Nine's flanks had stopped rising evenly and started to hitch, the way the great head had begun to swing, low and slow, not with drowsiness but with the blind searching motion of an animal that has understood, at some level beneath thought, that something is being done to it that it cannot see or fight, and has decided, in the last clear moment before the dark, to spend everything it has left rather than go down quiet. She said something to a warden. The record is not clear on what. The warden, a junior named Hallies, reported later only that the auxiliary had said, quite calmly, that the physician should stop, that the animal was not going under, it was banking, and that when it came back up it was going to come back up all at once. Hallies reported that he had not passed the message on. He gave two reasons. The first was that there was no channel by which an archivist would relay a mop hauler's opinion to a physician adept of Dra's standing, and both would rightly have asked what business either of them had. The second reason, which Halley's gave more quietly and only when pressed, was that the woman had not seemed worried. She had said it the way you tell a man his tea is about to boil over. And a person is not moved to sound the alarm by someone who is not sounding it themselves. 9 came back up all at once. It came up off the floor with the whole banked reserve of a heavy-world apex that had been trained since birth to survive the valley's poisons, and it hit the inner barrier at the exact seam where Ostmund's strike had already weakened it, and the barrier did not bend this time. It failed. It came apart in a single flat crack that Dreed felt in his sternum, and a section of reinforced post the length of a man went spinning across the apron, and the environmental gallery, Dra's gallery, 2 barriers and a blast shield away, which no one had thought needed to be far because no one had thought the animal would ever reach it, took the leading edge of the collapse. No one was killed. Dreed would write that line again and mean it again and be more surprised by it each time. Dra was fast for a small hunched being, and her aids faster, and the blast shield did the one job a blast shield is for. But the delivery system was gone, and the model was gone with it. 40 minutes of chemistry undone in a single upward surge, and physician-adept Semel Dra stood in the wreck of her pharmacy shrine looking at the animal she had proven could not stay awake, which was very much awake, and which was looking back at her through the broken barrier with its sides heaving and its head high and something in its bearing that Dreed, from the gallery, could only describe in the log as awareness, though he knew the word would be struck. Dra left on the morning transport. She did not give a final assessment. She told Corvin only that the animal's chemistry did not close, and that in a long career she had never met a nervous system she could not reduce, and that she did not intend to make 9 the first entry in a new category. She said this without shame, which Dreed respected. A specialist who knows the exact edge of her specialty and will not step past it is a rarer thing than a specialist who wins. 2, Corvin said, standing in the fresh wreckage with the engineers already swarming the broken barrier. He did not sound discouraged. He sounded like a man reading a longer bill than he had expected, item by item. 4 to go. Dreed climbed back to his office and filed the incident and sat for a while looking at the disposition field on Subject 9's master record, at the word that was still sitting in it, waiting, patient as chemistry. Then he did a thing he was not supposed to do. He pulled the Terran auxiliary contract roster, because he had begun to want a name for the small woman with the mop, the one who had told a junior warden to stop the physician and had been right. There were 9 names on the roster. The billet assignments put 5 of them on the paddock corridor rotation. He could not have said from the gallery which of the 5 she was. He closed the roster. It was not his business. He was an archivist, and the animal was not his, and the woman was not his, and the whole affair would be resolved or it would end in the disposition field, and either way his only job was to write down which. He believed that for another day and a half. The third expert believed in nothing at all, which was the source of his strength. Harness engineer Carl Venth arrived with no ceremony and no cargo module and a single hard case he carried himself, and he did not go to look at the animal. He went to look at the reports, and the wreckage and the broken barrier, and he spent his first 6 hours at Hesk doing what Dreed did all day, which was reading, and Dreed liked him immediately for it. Venth was young for his rank, a lean pale Sethari with the burn scars up one forearm that marked a man who worked with live systems, and he had exactly one theory, which he stated once, flatly, and never repeated. The animal's cooperation is not required, he said. He said it to Corvin in the gallery with the paddock behind him and 9 pacing its rut, and he said it the way you state a load tolerance. The rider exalt wanted its consent. The physician adept wanted its unconsciousness. Both are the animals to give or withhold. I want neither. A body is a machine. A machine has inputs. If I own the inputs, I do not need the animal's permission to move it, still it, or stand it down. The neural harness does not ask the animal to obey. It removes obedience from the equation entirely. The animal decides to charge. The harness declines to let the muscle fire. It is not domination. Domination is a relationship, and relationships fail. He tapped the hard case. This is engineering. Engineering does not fail. It is only ever misapplied. It was, Dreed thought, the coldest thing he had heard yet, and also the first thing that sounded like it might actually work. The harness was a marvel. Venth walked the gallery through it while his fitting drones did the dangerous part. A lattice of contact filaments that seeded along the great nerve trunks at the base of the skull and down the spine, each one a two-way gate, reading the animal's motor intent a half-beat before the muscle received it, and on command, refusing to pass the signal along. In principle, the wearer became a body its owner could edit. A charge could be unmade in the microsecond between the decision and the leg. Venth would not ride 9 and would not drug it. He would simply, whenever it chose violence, quietly not allow the violence to reach the world. The fitting took a day, and it took the harness engineer's whole art, because the animal had to be still for the filaments to seat, and 9 was never still. Venth solved it the way he solved everything, without touching the problem's dignity. He did not sedate the animal. He exhausted it, running the paddock's environmental systems to keep it moving through the night, then flooding the space with a low subsonic that set every heavy world instinct in the beast to fleeing a predator that was not there, until near dawn 9 stood swaying in the center of its rut with nothing left, and the drones went in, and the filaments seeded, and the animal was too spent to stop them. Dreed watched the readouts come alive on Venth's board that morning and felt something he was ashamed of, which was hope. Green lattice, every nerve trunk reporting. The engineer had done the thing the writer and the physician could not. He had gotten hardware onto the animal and made it hold. Venth ran a diagnostic pass, then a live capture, watching 9's motor intent scroll up his board in real time, the animal thinking about moving before it moved, its whole nervous grammar laid open like a manifest. There, Venth said, and it was the closest thing to warmth Dreed ever heard from him. Now we speak the same language. Now it cannot lie to me. He set his hands on the interface. Wake it. They let 9 recover through the morning. And when the animal had its feet under it again, and its head up, and the old slate-gray fury rising back into it as it understood, as it always understood, faster than anyone gave it credit for, that it had been handled while it slept, that there was something new riding the back of its own skull, Venth simply waited for it to charge. 9 charged. Venth's board lit with the motor cascade, the decision blooming across the lattice a half-beat ahead of the legs, and the engineer's hands moved, and the harness declined. And for one instant it worked exactly as promised. Dreed saw it. The whole gallery saw it. The animal's forelimbs buckling mid-stride as the signal to drive them simply failed to arrive. The great body stumbling, catching itself, confused. A charge unmade in the air. A sound went through the Sethari in the gallery that was almost worship. It worked. The impossible animal had decided to kill and been quietly, bloodlessly, told no by a machine. It worked for 4 seconds. What happened in the 5th second was the thing that no report ever fully explained, and that Dreed came in time to understand better than any of the specialists, though it took him months. The harness read the animal's intent through the nerve trunks and refused the signal at the trunk. But 9 was a heavy world apex, and heavy world apexes had evolved along a valley floor where the prey learned every trick a nervous system could learn, and the predator that survived was the one whose body did not depend on any single path. When the main trunks went dark, 9 did not stop. It rooted around them. It fired the muscle through the deep, redundant pathways that Venth's lattice did not gate, the slow secondary grammar that a domestic animal would never have possessed and would never have needed. and the charge that the harness had unmade a half-second before rebuilt itself out of nothing and arrived. The harness, sensing its command refused, did what a live system does when the world does not match its model. It escalated. It pushed more current through the filaments to force the refusal, and the filaments, seated along the great nerve trunks of an animal in full flight, did the one thing Vince's whole cold art existed to prevent. They hurt the animal. Dreed did not have the words for what he saw then, and did not try to put them in the log. He wrote only, harness malfunction, subject distress, containment breach class 3, and he left it, because the rest of it was not the kind of thing you filed. 9 screamed differently. That was all he let himself know. The great animal that had roared for 200 days in fury roared now in something else, and it tore at itself, at the thing on the back of its skull, and it hit the barrier and the far wall and the floor, blind, and Vince was shouting to cut the lattice. Cut it. And the drones were trying to reach filaments that were now seated in a body that would not hold still to be unseated, and the whole beautiful cold theory came apart in the space of the animal's agony. They cut it eventually. An emergency purge, every filament released at once, the hardware falling away, and the animal stood at last free of it, shaking, its slate hide slick, its sides working like bellows, and it backed into the corner of its ruined paddock and put its head down and made a low, continuous sound that was worse than any roar, and it would not stop making it. The gallery had gone silent. Even the Sethari, who Dreed had watched treat the whole affair as a spectacle, were quiet now, because there is a sound an animal makes that reaches even people who have decided not to care, and 9 was making it. Vince stood at his dead board. He was pale, which for a Sethari of his coloring meant very pale, and he did not defend the theory, and he did not blame the animal. He said one thing, quietly, mostly to himself, and Dreed happened to be close enough to catch it. I owned every path it had, Vince said. It had a path I didn't own. He packed his single hard case himself, as he had unpacked it, and he left on the next transport, and Dreed noticed that before he went, he stood a long moment at the gallery glass looking down at the animal in the corner, and that whatever was on his face was not the face of a man whose engineering had merely been misapplied. Down in the service corridor, when the gallery had cleared and the engineers had gone in to sweep the wreck of the harness, one figure stayed. Dreed saw her on the corridor monitor later, when he was reviewing the incident feed, and he watched it 3 times. The small human woman had come to the service grill. She was not supposed to be there. The corridor had been ordered clear. She stood at the grill with the dog beside her, and she looked at the animal in the corner making its terrible sound, and she did nothing at all for a long time. She did not speak. She did not reach through the grill. She simply stood there on the other side of the bars, small and still, and let the animal be seen by something that was not trying to fix it. And on the monitor, over the space of several minutes, the sound the animal was making changed. It did not stop, but it dropped by degrees from the high blind edge of it to something lower and more tired, and near the end of the feed 9's head came up, just a little, and turned toward the grill, toward the small still shape and the dog beside it, and it held there. The woman said something. The corridor pickup was poor and the words did not carry. But Dreed watched her mouth move 3 or 4 words, low, unhurried, the way you'd speak to a horse or a frightened child in the dark, and then she picked up her mop and her bucket and she and the dog walked back down the corridor and out of frame, and the animal watched them go, and after they had gone it stood a while longer with its head up and then, for the first time in 11 days, it lay down. Dreed watched that part twice more. 3, he heard Corvin say, on the command channel, flat, unshaken, reading down the bill. 3 to go. Dreed sat in his office with the corridor feed frozen on the small woman at the grill, and for the first time it occurred to him, fully, as a thing he could no longer unnotice, that in the space of one feed, a mop hauler had done more for the animal than a rider, a physician, and an engineer had managed between them, and that not one person in the building of record had seen it, because not one person in the building of record had been watching the animal. They had all been watching the experts. He pulled the auxiliary roster again. This time he did not close it. He went down to the paddock corridor the next morning before his shift, which broke 3 separate protocols, and he told himself he was doing it to verify a billet assignment for the log, which was a lie so thin he did not bother to finish thinking it. The corridor smelled of disinfectant and the deep animal reek that no disinfectant reached. 9 was awake in its ruined paddock, standing, quiet, its head low, and it tracked him along the grill as he came, and the tracking made the skin on the back of his neck draw tight even with a barrier between them. He found her at the far end, where the drainage sump was, working a clog out of the grate with a hooked bar. The dog lay behind her in the corridor, chin on paws, and it lifted its head when Dreed came into view and looked at him with a long, level, unhurried attention, and then, having decided something, put its chin back down. "You're not supposed to be down here," she said, without turning around. Her voice was low and even and had no particular deference in it, which he was not used to. Sethari auxiliaries did not speak to record rank staff that way. She was not Sethari. "Neither are you," Dreed said. "The corridor was ordered clear during the harness fitting. You were at the grill. I saw the feed." That turned her. She straightened, the hooked bar loose in one hand, and looked at him properly for the first time, and he found that up close the plain, flat face was not blank at all. It was only still, the stillness of a person who had long ago stopped spending her expressions on people who did not matter and had not yet decided whether he did. Her eyes went over him once, the archivist's soft hands, the clean collar, the slate, and he watched her file him the way he filed intake weights. "You going to write me up?" she said. It was not a question. She did not sound worried about the answer. "No," he surprised himself with how quickly it came. "No, I wanted to ask you what you said to it." She looked at him a moment longer. Behind her, at the grill, the great animal shifted its weight, and Dreed flinched, and she did not. And she noticed him flinch, and she noticed herself not flinching, and something almost moved at the corner of her mouth, and did not quite become anything. "You lot," she said, "you've had 6 people fly across a system to fix that animal, and you're the first one who's come down here to look at it." She set the bar against the wall. "That tell you anything?" "Tell me what you said to it." "I told it the men were gone." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. That's all it wanted to know, whether the men were gone. She jerked her chin at the paddock, at the fresh wreckage, the broken barrier, the scored floor. "You people keep sending it something new every day. New voice, new smell, new hands, new machine. 200 days of every day being a stranger with a plan. You know what that does to anything alive?" She picked her bucket up. "It's not fighting you. It stopped fighting weeks ago if any of you were watching. It's just it can't rest. There's no hour of the day it gets to put its head down and know nothing's coming, so it doesn't put its head down. That's all this is. That's the whole thing your experts flew across a system to not see." Dreed stood in the reeking corridor and felt the floor of his understanding shift under him, the way it had shifted at the harness board, only lower down, in a place that held more. "You've been near it," he said slowly, "before this week. Haven't you?" She looked at him and did not answer, which was an answer. "The feed logs," Dreed said, mostly to himself now, the archivist in him already pulling the thread. "Somebody's been getting the sump grate cleared inside the paddock margin, and the day 30 intake, when it wouldn't take the transit slop, the feed records show it started eating on day 34. Nobody flagged what changed on day 34. He looked at her. "You changed on day 34. You got put on this corridor rotation on day 33. "I don't do anything," she said, and now there was a flat warning in it, the first thing she had said that carried an edge. "Understand me. I mop. I clear the sump. That animal's not mine, and I'm not a handler, and I don't have a certificate, and if you write in your little slate that a Terran auxiliary has been interfering with a wardency subject, they'll have me off this station on the next hull, and they'll go right back to killing it, and it'll die never once having had a quiet day. So no, I don't do anything. She held his eyes. I just don't send it anything new. The dog behind her had risen at the change in her voice, and it stood now at her heels still, weight forward, ears up, watching Dreed with that same level attention, and Dreed understood without being told that the animal had come to its feet not to threaten him but to be counted, to stand where she was and add itself to whatever she was, and that between the woman and the dog there was no gap at all, no command, no leash. They were simply two parts of one calm thing, and the calm was not softness. He had mistaken it for softness. It was not. It was the calm of something that had already measured every danger in the room and found none of them worth its expression. "What's the dog?" he said, because he did not know what else to say, and because he had begun to feel that the dog was, somehow, the center of it. "His name's Ledger." She said it, and the flat warning went out of her voice, and something under it came up brief and unguarded and was gone. "He's a stock dog, Border Collie. My grandmother's line off Cheval before it went bad, so he's old blood and he's just old now." She looked down at the dog and the dog looked up at her, and the exchange between them was so complete and so wordless that Dreed felt he had walked in on something private. He worked cattle his whole life. 10,000 head of the meanest brush stock on a world that ate people. "You want to know why nothing in this building scares me?" She nodded at Ledger. "Because I grew up watching a 40-pound dog turn a bull that could have folded a ground car, and never once raise his voice, and never once get touched, and never once run. You learn how that's done, you stop being impressed by loud." Dreed looked at the dog. It was, by every metric he had, an entirely unremarkable animal, medium, black and white, gray coming in around a soft dark muzzle, lying down again now that the moment had passed, chin on paws, watching the great slate-gray apex behind the grill with half-closed eyes and no more concern than a man watches weather. "How does a 40-pound dog turn a bull?" Dreed said. She was already back at the sump. "Same way you settle anything 10 times your size," she said over her shoulder. "You don't ask it, and you don't force it. You just be the thing in the room that already knows how it ends." She worked the hooked bar into the grate. "You want to help that animal, archivist. You'll go back upstairs and lose the roster page with my name on it, and you'll let your experts finish being wrong. And when they've run out of experts, you'll remember I told you it just needs one quiet day." Dreed went back upstairs. He did not lose the roster page. He could not quite make himself destroy a record. It was against the grain of everything he was. But he sealed it under his own authority, which was almost nothing, and he told himself it would hold. He had learned 2 things, going down to that corridor, and they sat in him uneasily all that day. The first was the woman's name, which he had gotten off the roster and not from her. Wren Calloway, 23, contract auxiliary, no certifications, no rank, no notes. The second was that she was right, and that nobody with the power to matter was going to believe her, and that there were still 3 experts to come. The 4th expert believed in patience, and she nearly worked, and that was the cruelest one to watch. Analyst Iron Prion was a xenobehaviorist from the deep academies, a tall, spindly, huge-eyed being of a species Dreed could not name, slow-moving and soft-spoken, and entirely without the arrogance of the 3 who had come before. She did not talk about riding the animal or reducing it or owning its inputs. She talked, in her long, careful sentences, about time. The others tried to change the animal's state in a day, she told Corvin, and this time Corvin listened with something like respect, because Prion was the first specialist who had begun by asking to see the incident logs going back to day 1 rather than skipping to the good parts. You cannot change a 200-day state in a day. Trauma is written slowly, and it is unwritten slowly. What this animal has learned over 200 days is that the approach of any intelligence means the arrival of a demand it cannot meet. Every one of us who enters its world enters as a threat. So, she folded her long hands. I will not enter its world. I will change its world from outside, one small good thing at a time, and I will let it learn at its own speed that the world can contain good things. It is called counter-conditioning. It is not fast, but it does not fail if one has the patience because it does not fight the animal. It befriends the environment. Dreed, at the back with his slate, wrote down does not fight the animal, befriends the environment, and thought of a woman with a mop saying, I just don't send it anything new, and felt the two things sit next to each other in his notes like a translation and its original. Priyan's method was quiet and it was gentle and it took 9 days. And for most of those 9 days, it was the most hopeful thing that had happened at HESC since 9 arrived. She began by doing nothing at all except being present, at a distance, at the same hour every day, so that the animal learned the shape of her at the gallery rail as a thing that came and watched and never demanded. Then she added the good things, one at a time, delivered automatically so that no hand was attached to them. Better feed, delivered on a schedule the animal could predict. The subsonic distress flooding shut off for good. The paddock's brutal environmental cycling eased into something like a day and a night. She gave the animal, for the first time in 200 days, a world with edges it could learn. And the animal learned. That was the part that made it cruel. Dreed watched 9, over those 9 days, begin to change. The pacing slowed. The rut in the floor stopped deepening. The great head began to come up not in fury, but in the plain alertness of an animal noticing that the good thing was on its way. By the 6th day 9 was taking its feed within a minute of the schedule and standing quiet afterward. By the 8th day it had begun to lie down in the afternoons, in the sun that came through the repaired dome, and sleep, actual sleep, the animal's guard actually down, for the first time on any record Dreed had ever filed. He caught himself hoping again. He caught the whole gallery hoping. Even Corvan, who hoped for nothing, stood longer at the glass those days. The thing Priyan understood that the others had not was true and good, and it was working. And the thing Priyan did not understand was the same thing none of them understood. And it was the thing that undid her. And Dreed only saw it because Ren Calloway had told him where to look. Priyan's whole beautiful patient method was still, at its root, a plan. It was a slower, kinder, more intelligent plan than the writers or the physicians or the engineers, but it was a plan imposed on the animal from outside by an intelligence with an objective, and the objective was not the animal's peace. The objective was the harness. Everything Priyan did, the schedule, the feed, the eased world, was scaffolding, built to bring the animal to a state calm enough that the Corps could finally, on day 9 or day 15 or day 30, walk in and put the working harness on it, and turn it into the squadron-priced weapon the wardency had paid for. Priyan was not befriending the animal. She was fattening the ground for the same demand that had broken it, and she was doing it so gently that the animal would never see the demand coming. The animal saw the demand coming. On the 9th day, with 9 calmer than it had been in its whole captivity, the wardency, impatient, over Priyan's objection, reading her 9 days of progress as a finished job rather than a first step, ordered a trial fitting. Just a partial. Just the shoulder contacts, to confirm the animal would now tolerate the hardware it had rejected before. Priyan argued against it and lost, because Priyan was a contractor and the wardency owned the animal, and she was made to stand at the rail and watch the fitting drones go in toward the animal she had spent 9 days teaching to trust the world. 9 watched the drones come. Dreed watched 9 watch them. He saw the exact moment the animal understood, saw the calm it had been learning to hold come off it like a sheet pulled from a body, saw the 9 days of good things resolve, in the animal's mind, into the oldest lesson it had, the one every gentle hour had only been hiding, that the world is a soft hand that reaches for you slow so the collar comes as a surprise. He saw the animal learn, in one instant, that the kindest thing that had ever happened to it had been a trap. It did not breach the barrier this time. Priyan's one lasting gift was that the barrier held because the animal did not throw itself at the walls. It simply took every good thing Priyan had built and set it on fire from the inside. It refused the feed. It refused the schedule. It stopped sleeping in the sun. It went back to the rut and the low, continuous fury, and it did so with a thoroughness that told Dreed the animal had decided, deliberately, that it would never again be caught believing the world could hold a good thing, because believing that was how they got the drones close. Priyan stayed 2 more days, trying to rebuild what the trial fitting had cost, and could not, because the thing she had been building was trust, and trust does not rebuild on the same ground where it was just spent as bait. She left on the 12th day, and unlike the others, she did not leave composed. She stood at the gallery rail before her transport and looked at the animal, back in its rut, back in its fury, and Dreed heard her say to Corvin in her long, careful voice with something torn in it now, "I could have brought it all the way. I could have. But not while it belongs to someone who will always, in the end, need it to accept the harness. You cannot counter-condition an animal into trusting a world that is genuinely trying to break it. The animal is not wrong. That is the tragedy of it, Warden Marshall. In every fight it has had in this building, the animal has been the only one telling the truth." She left. Corvin stood at the rail a long time after her transport had gone. "4," he said at last, and for the first time there was something under the flatness, something Dreed could not name but recognized, because he had begun to feel it himself. 2 to go. That night Dreed did not file the incident right away. He sat in his office with the animal's master record open, and the disposition field with its patient waiting word, and he thought about a xeno-behaviorist of the deep academies and a mop hauler off a dead colony arriving, by entirely different roads, at the same sentence. Do not send it anything new. Do not fight the animal. The analyst had needed 9 days and a lifetime of study to reach the place the auxiliary lived. And even the analyst in the end had been building toward the harness, because the analyst worked for the people who owned the animal, and the auxiliary worked for no one and wanted nothing from the animal. And that Dreed was beginning to see was the whole of the difference, and it was everything. He thought about going back down to the corridor. He did not. He had sealed her name in a record and told himself it would hold, and he was beginning to understand that the most dangerous thing he could do to Wren Calloway was to make the wardency notice her. So he waited with the rest of them for the 5th expert. The 5th expert did not use hands or drugs or machines or time. She used her mind, and she was the only one of the 6 who came away from Subject 9 genuinely afraid. Speaker All-Vaineth was of the All, a species Dreed had read about and never met, a people who did not so much talk as touch, an empathic kind, whose members threaded the surface of another mind and laid their own calm across it like a hand laid flat on a frightened flank. In the war they were priceless. An all-speaker could walk onto a battlefield of panicking animals and mounts and men and simply broadcast steadiness, and the panic would drain out of a whole field at once, and the all charged for it accordingly. Vaineth was the most accomplished of her generation. She had settled riot beasts and stampeding cavalry herds, and once, it was said, an entire colony ship's worth of passengers in the grip of a decompression terror. She had never met a mind she could not reach. She arrived quiet and grave, robed, and she asked for no equipment and no floor time and no clearing of the gallery. She asked only for silence, and for everyone present to hold themselves calm, so that the field she meant to project into the animal would not be muddied by the fear of 40 onlookers. Corvin gave the order. The gallery went still. Dreed at the back made himself breathe slow, and found it was not hard, because there was something in the room already, a faint warmth at the edges of his own mind, the speaker beginning to work, gathering the calm of the crowd into herself before she turned it on the animal. She stood at the rail and closed her eyes and reached for Subject 9. Dreed felt the room lean into it. This, at last, seemed like the thing, no plan imposed from outside, no demand, no scaffolding toward a harness, only pure calm delivered mind to mind. The animal's terror simply lifted off it by a being who had lifted terror off 10,000 others. If any of them could do the thing the mop hauler did without wanting anything from the animal, surely it was this one, whose whole art was to want nothing but the other's peace. The speaker reached into the animal's mind, and the animal's mind reached back. Dreed never got a clean account of what happened in the next few seconds, because the two people best placed to describe it were the speaker, who would not, and the animal, which could not. What he had was the outside of it, the speaker at the rail going rigid, her grave, calm face opening into something he had never seen on an adult of any species, a raw, undefended astonishment, and a sound coming out of her, thin and rising, and then the speaker breaking contact so hard that she staggered back from the rail into her aids and would not go near the glass again. What she said later to Corvan in a private room, Dreed only got because he was the one who transcribed the exit interview for the record, and he read it many times, and it stayed with him longer than anything else the 6 experts said. "I have laid my calm on the dying," the speaker said, "on animals with their entrails on the ground, on soldiers who had watched their squads burn. I have never been unable to reach a mind. I reached this one." She paused a long time. "It is not damaged. Do you understand me, Warden Marshall? Everyone in this building has been treating that animal as a broken thing, a mind cracked by captivity that must be repaired. It is not broken. Its mind is whole, and it is vast, and it is old in a way I do not have the words for, older than its body, older than its captivity, the way a mountain is older than the snow on it. And it is not afraid the way a broken animal is afraid. It knows exactly where it is and exactly what has been done to it and exactly what all of you intend, and it has decided, with a whole and unbroken and entirely sane mind, that it will not be made into your weapon, and that it will spend itself to the last if that is what refusal costs." She drew a slow breath. "I tried to lay calm across it. It did not need my calm. It has more of its own than I have ever met. What it let me feel, in the moment I reached it, I think it did that on purpose, Warden Marshall. I think it wanted one of us finally to know. It let me feel what it is like to be the most dangerous thing in every valley you were ever born into, and to be caged by creatures who are afraid of you, and to understand that they are afraid of you, and to be, underneath the fury they keep provoking, tired. Only tired. It wants what the tired want. It wants to be left alone, and it wants, before the end, one being to come near it who is not there to take something." The speaker stood. "It will not get that from me. I cannot go back to the rail, not because I am afraid it will hurt me, because it will not, and I cannot bear to reach again into a mind that composed itself and reached out and asked, and be one more visitor who came only to use it." She left within the hour. Of all 6, she was the only one who wept, and she wept not from fear but from something Dreed did not have a rank low enough or a slate blank enough to file. 5, Corvin said. He said it alone, on the empty gallery, after the transport had gone. He did not know Dreed was still there, in the shadow at the back, and Dreed did not announce himself. And so he saw the thing Corvin did next that no one else saw, and that changed how Dreed thought of the old warden for the rest of his life. Corvin went down to the floor. He crossed the empty apron to the barrier, alone, no goad, no drone, no plan, and he stood close to the glass, closer than his own protocols allowed, and he looked at the animal in the rut, and the animal looked back at him, and for a long time the warden marshal of Hesk and the thing he had signed the death of stood a meter apart with a barrier between them and simply regarded each other. "I put the word in the field," Corvin said to it low, and Dreed above went very still so as not to be heard. "You know that? Course you don't. It's a word. It means they'll come one morning and it'll be quick and you won't know it's coming. I signed it. Best thing I had to offer you at the time. A quick one. Better than what my people were doing to you a day at a time." He was quiet. The animal watched him. "Then the accountants got the word, and now I've stood here a month and watched 5 of the best in the sector fly in and take a piece of you and fly out again, and every one of them wrong, and every one of them costing you another week of this." He put one broad hand flat on the glass, which Dreed had never once seen him do in 11 years of filing this man's dispositions. One more coming. Greven, best I ever served with. If he can't do it, that's the last of them, and then it's my morning again, and I'll make it quick, and I'll not let anyone tell me it was mercy. He took his hand off the glass. I don't know what you are. The all says you're not broken. I believe her. I've been in this trade 40 years, and I think you might be the truest thing I ever caged, and I don't know how to say I'm sorry to something that take my arm off for saying it, so I won't. But I wanted to come down once without a plan, so you'd have had it at least. One of us. Once. He stood a moment more. Then he turned and walked off the floor, and above him in the dark of the gallery, Ostwin Dreed sat with his slate in his lap and did not write a word of it down, because some things are records and some things are not, and he had finally, at 41 days into the subject 9 matter, learned the difference. The 6th expert was the best of them, and the Corps' own, and everyone at Hesk understood that when Toll Greven failed there would be no 7th, because there was no one after Greven. He was the end of the road. Greven was old, older than Corvin, a legend in the Beastward Corps who had come out of a long retirement because Corvin had asked him personally, one old warden to another, over a private channel that did not go through the wardency at all. Dreed knew about the channel because he handled the comms archive. He knew that Corvin had not requested Greven through the specialist directive. Corvin had requested Greven the way you ask a friend to help you bury something. Greven had ridden and broken and gentled more war beasts than any handler living, and he had a reputation, unusual in the Corps, for bringing animals in soft, for being the one they sent when the animal was worth too much to break and too dangerous to keep, the one who could find the road between. He arrived without an entourage, a stooped, weathered Sethari with a face like cracked leather and hands that had obviously been broken many times and set many times, and he did not go to the gallery, and he did not read the reports. He went down to the corridor to the grill, and he stood at it for a whole day, just looking, the way Dreed had learned to look, the way Ren Calloway looked, and Dreed watched him on the monitor and thought, with a lift of hope he had learned by now to distrust, that here at last was one who knew to watch the animal instead of the plan. And Greven did know. That was what made the 6th failure the one that finally broke something in the building, because Greven did everything right. He spent 3 days at the grill before he ever entered the paddock margin. He learned the animal's hours. He watched the way it favored the near corner, the way it tracked movement, the way Dreed saw him see it. Its fury had a floor to it now, a place beneath the rage where the animal was, as the All had said, simply tired. Greven read all of it correctly. He talked to the corridor staff, the real staff, not the experts, and Dreed found out later that Greven had talked to the auxiliaries too, had crouched down in the corridor one evening and talked a long while to a young human woman with a mop and a black and white dog, and had listened to her, actually listened, the only one of the 6 who did. What Greven did with what she told him was the tragedy of it. He believed her. But he was told Greven, 40 years the best in the Corps, and when a mop hauler told him the animal only needed one quiet person to come near it wanting nothing, Greven heard confirmation of what his own 3 days at the grill had already taught him. And Greven believed, because he had never in 40 years met the animal he could not be that person for, that the one quiet person the animal needed was himself. He was almost right. He was closer than any of them. He went into the paddock margin on the 4th day, alone, soft, no goad, no plan the animal could smell, and he did the thing Ren did. He did not ask and he did not force. He simply came in low and quiet and settled himself at a distance and waited, projecting nothing, wanting nothing the animal could detect, an old man sitting down in the corner of a dangerous thing's world and letting it decide. And for a long time it worked. The animal watched him and did not charge. The animal let him stay. Hour after hour Greven sat in the margin and the animal held its place, and the gallery, which had filled again, watched two old predators share a space in the kind of silence that Dreed had only ever seen between the woman and the dog. Batol Grevin had come out of retirement to bring the animal in, and bringing the animal in meant the harness, and meant the saddle, and meant the war, and the animal, whole-minded, unbroken, old as a mountain under its snow, knew the difference between a being who had come to sit with it and a being who had come to sit with it as the first move of a longer game. The All had felt it. It knows exactly what all of you intend. Grevin intended, in the end, the same thing the other five had intended. He intended, however gently, however lovingly, to make the animal serve. And the animal, which would have let a being who wanted nothing come all the way to its side, let Grevin come close, and closer, over 2 long patient days. And then at the last meter, at the exact moment Grevin's decades of instinct told him the road was open, and the animal was his to bring in, the animal quietly, deliberately, without fury, stood up and put itself between Grevin and the gate and made it clear, in the plain grammar of a body built to end things, that the old man would be leaving now and would not be coming back, and that the door had been open only so the animal could show him, without a mark on either of them, that it had chosen not to walk through it. No one was hurt. Grevin was not thrown, not struck. The animal never touched him. It simply revoked, in one movement, the whole road Grevin had spent 6 days building, and stood over the ruin of it, and looked at the old handler with an expression that Grevin himself described afterward. In the only exit interview any of the 6 gave that Dreed did not have to transcribe because Grevin wrote it out himself, in a hand as broken and careful as his face. Grevin wrote, "I have brought in animals that hated me, animals that feared me, animals that wanted me dead. I have never failed to find the road because every animal alive will take the road if you offer it gently enough. This is the first animal I have met that saw the road and understood it perfectly and refused it not from fear, not from rage, but from judgment. It weighed what I was offering and it declined. I did not fail to gentle it. It declined to be gentled by me, and it was right too, because I came to it as the last kind hand of an institution that would still, at the end of my kindness, put it in a saddle. The animal is not the problem at HESC. The animal is the only one at HESC who has understood the problem from the beginning. My recommendation is that the Corps release it or destroy it, and that it stop pretending there is a third thing, because this animal will die before it lets us have the third thing, and it will be right every single day until it does." He signed it. He gripped Corvin's forearm on his way out, the 2 old men holding each other a moment longer than the grip required, and he left on the transport, and with him left the last expert in the sector, the last name on the list, the end of the road. 6, Corvin said. He said it in the gallery, to the assembled staff, flat and final, and this time there was no next number, because there was no next expert, and everyone in the room knew what came after the 6th failure. The stay order had bought 41 days and 6 specialists, and the best the sector had, and all of it had come to the same place, which was the place the word in the disposition field had been waiting all along. "The specialist directive is exhausted," Corvin told the room. "I'll file the finding tonight." Disposition proceeds at first light. He did not soften it and he did not dress it up. Clear the gallery. It's not a viewing. The gallery cleared. Dreed did not clear. Corvin saw him this time at the back, and the 2 of them looked at each other across the empty rows, the archivist and the warden, and Corvin, who had told an animal he was sorry the night before and thought no one had heard, seemed to understand that Dreed had heard, and did not order him out. "You want to say something, archivist," Corvin said. It was not a question. He was too tired for questions. Dreed's mouth was dry. He was a record-rank staffer with soft hands who had never in his life put himself between an authority and a decision, and every protocol in him and every year of his training told him to go upstairs and file the finding, and let the morning come. He thought of a small woman in a gray coverall telling him that the most dangerous thing he could do was make the wardency notice her. He thought of the animal lying down once, for the length of one corridor feed, when the only being who wanted nothing from it stood at the grill and told it the men were gone. "There's a seventh," Dreed said. Corvin looked at him a long moment. "There is no seventh, the directive named 6. There is no one after Grevin." "Not on the directive." Dreed's heart was going hard enough that he was certain the old warden could hear it in his voice. "The directive named 6 specialists. It didn't name the one person in this building who's already done the thing all 6 of them failed to do. I have it on the corridor feed. Day 209. The night the harness came off and the animal wouldn't stop the sound it was making. I can play it for you." He played it for him. He had it cued. He had been carrying it for days. He put it up on the gallery's main display. The poor grainy corridor pickup, the great animal in the corner making the sound that reached even the Sethari, and the small gray shape of the woman coming to the grill with the dog beside her, and doing nothing, and the sound dropping by degrees from the high blind edge of it down to something a tired thing makes, and the animal's head coming up, and turning, and holding on the small still shape, and the animal lying down. Corvin watched it. He watched it twice the way Dreed had. When it finished, he stood very still. "That's an auxiliary," he said at last. "A Terran contract hand, no certification, no rank, no training." "No," Dreed agreed. "And in one corridor feed she did what 6 of the best in the sector couldn't do in 40 days. And she did it without a plan, without a harness, without a drug, without a tool, without touching it. And she did it because... She told me this, Warden Marshall, and I didn't understand it until the All said the same thing in her own words. She's the only one who's ever come near that animal wanting nothing from it. She's not trying to make it into anything. That's the whole difference. Every one of the 6, even Grevin, even the All, every one of them at the bottom of it needed the animal to become something. She just doesn't send it anything new." He was talking too fast now, all the sealed pressure of 40 days coming out of him at once. "You said it yourself, last night. You came down here and you told it you wanted to come once without a plan. She comes without a plan every day. She's been coming without a plan since day 34, and if you pull the feed logs, you'll see the exact days the animal started eating, started letting the sump grate get cleared. You'll see her, Warden Marshall, underneath every good day that animal has had in this building. You will find her. And none of us saw it because she's a mop hauler and we were all watching the experts." Corvin was quiet for a long time. "If I put a Terran auxiliary in a paddock with a Class 3 subject," he said finally, "and it goes wrong, that's not a failed specialist flying home with a story. That's a dead contract hand and an inquiry that ends me and every warden under me, and the animal put down that same hour with a worse word than terminate in the field. You understand the shape of what you're asking. You're asking me to bet that girl's life." "I'm asking you to let her bet it," Dreed said. "She already has, every day for 176 days. The only difference is that now someone with rank would be watching." He made himself slow down. "And she'll say no if you order it. I know her a little now. If you make it a wardency operation, if you put it on a directive and make her a specialist, she'll refuse, because the second the wardency owns what she does, she becomes one more being who came to the animal because an institution sent her, and it won't work, and she knows it won't work. It only works because she wants nothing. The instant you make it official, you've made her want something, and you've killed the one thing that makes her different from the 6. Corvin turned that over. He was a bureaucrat as much as a warden, 40 years of it, and Dreed watched him find the shape of the problem the way Dreed found the shape of an incident, from the outside by its edges. "Then it can't be official," Corvin said slowly. "No. And it can't be an order. No. It has to be something she chooses, and you have to be willing to stand behind a thing you didn't order and can't put on a directive, and if it goes wrong, it's your name and no cover." Dreed swallowed. "I'm not going to pretend that's a small thing to ask." Corvin looked at the frozen image on the display, the small gray shape at the grill, the great animal lying down. He looked at it a long time. Then he did a thing Dreed would carry the rest of his career. He reached up and with one broad finger he closed the corridor feed himself, so that there would be no record that it had been played on the gallery display, no timestamp, no witness of record, nothing an inquiry could find. Dispositions at first light, Corvin said. That gives us the night. Officially, I'm doing a final welfare inspection of the subject before disposition. That's standard, that's mine to call, that's on no directive and needs no authorization. Auxiliary staff are present in the corridor at all hours. That's the roster, not my doing. If during a routine inspection a contract hand happens to be in the corridor and happens to do her job and the subject happens to respond, he stopped. I'm too old to say the rest of that sentence out loud. Go get her. Not as an order, ask her. An archivist, he fixed Dreed with the flat gray weight of him. If she says no, that's the end of it and the morning comes and you and I never speak of this again and you go back to filing weights. Are we clear? We're clear, Dreed said. He went to get her. It was the bravest thing he had ever done, and all he did was walk down a corridor. She was where she always was at the sump end and the dog was with her, and she did not turn around when he came, but this time she said, "They're out of experts," before he'd said anything, and it was not a question. How do you know? Because Grevin came and said goodbye. She said it flatly, but there was something in it. He's a good man. He was the only one of them worth a damn, and he told me himself he couldn't do it, and he told me why, and he was right about the why. She turned then and looked at Dreed, and her plain face had something in it he had not seen before, because she had heard in his footsteps or his silence or the fact that he had come down here at all, what he had come to say. And now you're down here at night, 40 minutes before the shift change with your slate turned off. So they're out of experts and somebody upstairs remembered the girl with the mop. Her jaw set. The answer's no. I haven't asked yet. You don't have to. I told you what happens. I go in there official with rank watching and the wardency's blessing and I become one more of them, one more thing that came to take. It won't work. It works because I'm nothing to it. The second I'm something, I'm a threat. She shook her head. And even if it worked, even if I got it calm and they got the harness on it and they got their squadron-priced weapon, then I've done the worst thing anybody in this building could do to it. I've handed it to them. Priyan figured that out on her last day. You can't gentle an animal into a trap and call it kindness. I'm not going to be the one who finally gets it into the saddle. I'd rather they shot it in the morning than I be that. They're going to shoot it in the morning, Dreed said. That's what's happening at first light. There's no version of tonight where the animal lives unless something changes tonight. Grevin's recommendation was release or destroy, and the wardency won't release a squadron-priced asset, so it's destroy. First light. That's the choice on the table, not saddle or freedom. There is no freedom on the table. There's a needle at dawn, or there's whatever you can do tonight. He watched that land on her, watched the flat calm of her take the weight of it, and he pressed the only advantage he had, which was the truth. And Corvin isn't offering you a wardency operation. He closed the feed himself. There's no directive, no record, no rank on paper. Officially, he's doing a welfare inspection and you happen to be in the corridor doing your job. That's all. Nothing about tonight makes you one of them because nobody sent you and there's nothing to sign, and the wardency doesn't know your name and Corvin just made sure it never will. He stopped. He's not asking you to hand it to them. Dreed found he had to look for the words because they were not words an archivist used. He came down here last night alone and told the animal he was sorry. I heard him. He's not asking you to save an asset. He's asking you to give it one quiet day before the morning because he can't, and 6 experts couldn't, and you're the only one who ever has. The dog had come to its feet during this. Not in alarm. It simply rose, the way it rose whenever her attention gathered, and it stood at her heel, weight forward, ears up, and it turned its soft dark head toward the grill, toward the great animal in the corner, and Dreed had the distinct and unscientific sense that the dog understood the shape of the conversation better than he did. Wren looked down at Ledger. Then she looked at the animal in the paddock, really looked. The long, unhurried, measuring look Dreed had watched her give the whole scene on the first morning, and he could see her taking the shape of it. The night, the needle at dawn, the closed feed, the old warden who'd said he was sorry, all of it. The way she took the shape of everything from the outside, by its edges, quietly once. "It won't be for them," she said at last. "It was not agreement, it was a term. Understand me. What I do tonight I do for the animal and not one thing beyond it. I'm not getting it ready for a harness. I'm not gentling it toward a saddle. If your warden marshal thinks a quiet animal is a saddleable animal, he's going to learn something. All I'm going to do is give it what it's wanted since day one, which is one being to come near it that doesn't want a single thing from it, and 1 hour where nothing new is coming. And if that buys it a morning, good, and if it doesn't, I'll have given it the 1 hour, and that's worth doing on its own." She looked at Dreed. "Those are the terms. It's not a trick to save an asset. It's a kindness to an animal, and if it happens to save the animal, that's the animal's business, not the wardency's. Corvin agrees to that, out loud, to my face, or I clean my sump and go to bed and let the morning come, and at least the animal had me at the grill tonight either way." "Tell him yourself," Dreed said. "He's coming down," he said. "Welfare inspection." He meant he wanted to be here. Corvin came down at the shift change, alone in the blackened brass, and he did not bring a drone or a goad or a single warden, and Dreed thought that was the first thing that mattered, that the old man came down the corridor the way Wren came down it, with nothing in his hands and nothing behind him. He stopped a few paces from her. He was 3 times her size and the most powerful being in the holdfast, and he stood in front of a 23-year-old mop hauler off a dead colony, and Dreed watched him choose, deliberately, not to make it an order. "I'm told you'll only do this on terms," Corvin said. "Say them." She said them. She said them exactly as she'd said them to Dreed, flat and unhurried, no deference and no defiance, just the plain shape of the thing. That whatever she did tonight, she did for the animal and nothing beyond it. That she was not preparing it for a harness or a saddle. That if he was hoping a calm animal was an animal the Corps could finally use, he would be disappointed, and she would not lift a finger to help him toward it. That this was a kindness owed to a living thing before its morning, and it stopped being that the instant it became anything else. Corvin listened to all of it. When she was done, he was quiet a moment. "You think I want a weapon," he said. "It was not quite a question. You think I'm standing here at the shift change, 40 years in, off every directive, with my name on a disposition I signed myself, because I'm angling for a saddle. I think everybody in this building wants a weapon," Wren said. "You've all wanted a weapon since day one. That's what the animal knows. That's why it won't put its head down. I don't hold it against you. It's your trade." She met his eyes. "But I need to hear you say tonight isn't that, because the animal will know if it is. It's smarter than any of us gave it credit for. It let the all feel exactly what it is on purpose, so one of you would finally know. It knows what you want the same way it knows what I don't. And if I walk in there tonight carrying even a piece of your want, it'll read it off me before I've cleared the gate, and it'll be right too." Corvin looked at her for a long moment. Then the old warden did the second thing Dreed carried the rest of his career. "I signed the word in the field to give it a quick death, because a quick death was the best thing I had to offer it, and I've hated every day since that it was the best thing I had." His voice did not change. It was the same flat gray weight it always was, and that was what made it land. "I don't want a weapon tonight. I stopped wanting the weapon somewhere around the 3rd expert, if I'm honest, and I've kept the wanting on my face out of 40 years of habit. I came down here last night with nothing in my hands, and I told that animal I was sorry, and I meant it, and it's the only true thing I've done in this whole miserable business. You want to give it 1 quiet hour before the morning. So do I can't. You can. That's the whole of it. There's no saddle in me tonight, girl. There's just an old man who's put down more good animals than he can count and would like, once before he retires, to have been in the room when one of them didn't have to be." He drew a breath. "Those are my terms back to you. Believe them or don't." Dreed watched Wren Calloway weigh the old warden the way she weighed everything, once from the outside by its edges. Whatever she found there, she found it true. "All right," she said. She looked down at the dog. Ledger looked up at her. And Dreed, standing to the side of two of the least likely allies he had ever seen, an old Sethari warden and a young human mop hauler, felt the whole 41 days of the Subject 9 matter narrow down to the small black and white shape of a stock dog at a young woman's heel, and understood, without being able to have said how, that the dog was about to be the most important thing in the room. "Then it's just the three of us and the two of them," Wren said. "She picked nothing up. She carried no tool. Kill the corridor lights down to stand by. Nothing new, remember. No bright, no loud, no drone, no more people. If anyone else comes down here, it's off." She looked at Corvan. "And whatever happens in there, you don't move, and you don't speak, and you don't reach for anything, no matter what it looks like. If it looks like it's going wrong, it isn't. And if it is, there's nothing you could do anyway, so you'd only be one more new thing in the room at the worst possible second. Can you stand still, Warden Marshal, for however long it takes? Can you be the thing that doesn't move?" "I can stand still," Corvan said, "longer than anything alive." "Good," said Wren, "because that's the whole trick, that's all it ever was." She stepped to the inner gate and the dog came with her, unbidden at her heel, soft-eyed and unhurried, and she put her hand on the gate release. "Watch the dog," she said to both of them without looking back. "Not me, him. He'll tell you how it's going before I will." She opened the gate and walked into the paddock with the apex predator, and she did it the way she did everything, without ceremony, as though she were stepping out to clear a sump. Dreed stopped breathing. He was aware of Corvan beside him going as still as a man can go, the enormous old warden holding himself like a held breath, one hand not quite reaching for a release that his own instructions had told him not to touch. On the far side of the paddock, the great slate-gray animal came up off its rut in a single flowing motion, all two-story mass of it, and turned toward the gate, and fixed the small gray shape crossing its floor with that eyeless attention, and Dreed's whole body screamed at him that he was about to watch a woman die. Wren did not stop. She did not slow. She did not do any of the things a person does at the approach of a thing that could fold her in half. No crouch, no widening of the arms, no soft high voice, none of the theater the six had brought. She walked at an ordinary pace across the open floor of the paddock, unhurried, her hands loose and low and empty, looking not at the animal but at a point on the floor a little ahead of her own feet, and she came to a stop maybe 8 meters out, at no particular place, for no particular reason, and she simply stood there, small and still, and did nothing. And Ledger walked in past her. Dreed almost missed it, because his whole attention was locked on the woman and the great animal above her. But Corvan's low voice, barely a breath, said, "The dog," and Dreed pulled his eye down and saw. The Border Collie had come through the gate at her heel, and then, at some cue Dreed never saw, or at no cue at all, at nothing but its own long judgment, it had left her side. It walked out ahead of her, past her, out onto the open floor between the woman and the apex, at an angle slow, its weight low, its head level, and it did not look at the great animal directly and it did not look away from it. It held it at the very edge of its attention the way Dreed had watched it hold everything, and it came to a stop a few meters ahead of Wren and a little to the side, between her and 9, and it lay down. It lay down, chin on paws, soft-eyed in the open. Under the standing mass of a heavy-whirled apex, a 40-pound earth-stock dog folded its legs and put its chin on its paws and lay down on the floor as though the most dangerous thing in the sector were a spring afternoon, and it fixed the great animal with a level, unbothered, half-lidded gaze, and it held it there. The great animal looked at the dog. Dreed would spend a long time afterward trying to describe what changed, and he never got it to his own satisfaction, because the thing that changed did not happen in the animal's body first. Its body did not move. It stood exactly as it had stood, forelimbs planted, head high, the slate hide taut over the slabs of muscle. Nothing moved. And yet something went out of it or came into it, some pressure released or some question answered, and Dreed felt it the way you feel a sound stop. A thing you had stopped noticing because it had been going on so long, gone, and the silence of its going enormous. It knows him, Corvin breathed. Look at it, it knows what he is. Dreed did not understand it then. He understood it later in pieces, from the All's exit interview and from the ethnographic files and, most of all, from Wren, who explained it to him weeks after in about 4 sentences, the way she explained everything. The great animal was an apex out of the deep valleys of Voth, a thing shaped by a heavy world into the last predator its valley ever heard, and in 211 days of captivity it had been surrounded, hour on hour, by beings that were afraid of it. The wardens were afraid of it. The experts were afraid of it, under their competence, the writer's swagger, the physician's distance, the engineer's cold, all of it built over fear. Even the All, who loved it, had come to it with awe, which is a kind of fear. Every intelligence that had entered its world in 200 days had entered as prey that had learned to build cages. And prey, however clever, is prey. And prey wanting something from a predator is the oldest and worst kind of pressure there is. And then a small 4-legged thing had walked out onto its floor and lain down in the open, chin on paws, and looked at it without one atom of fear. Not fearlessness of ignorance. The animal could tell the difference. It was the whole of the difference. A thing that did not fear it because it did not understand the danger would have smelled wrong, would have moved wrong, would have been just one more stupid new thing to be endured. But the dog understood the danger perfectly. Every line of its low, steady body said so, and had waited, and had lain down anyway in the open, unhurried, and put its chin on its paws. The only creature that lies down in front of an apex without fear is a creature that has already, at some level below thought, established that it does not need to be afraid. The dog was telling the great animal a thing in the only grammar both of them shared, the grammar of bodies and distance and stillness that ran deeper than any species, older than any language, the grammar of the valley floor. It was telling it, I have measured you, and I am not afraid, and I am not leaving, and nothing is coming. And the great animal, whole-minded, unbroken, old as a mountain under its snow, read the message clean, because it had been waiting 211 days for exactly one thing. And here at last, in the shape of a graying stock dog off a dead colony, was the one being in the sector that had come near it and wanted absolutely nothing. Dreed watched the apex predator lower its head. It did it slowly. There was no submission in it. That was the thing that struck him, the thing he could never make the report convey. It was not the animal giving in. It was the animal setting something down. The great head came down, degree by degree, the high fury carriage of it easing until it was level, and then lower, until the enormous jaw hung a meter off the floor and the eyeless face was turned toward the small lying dog. And the two of them, the 40-pound earth animal and the 2-ton Voth apex, regarded each other across 4 meters of paddock floor in a silence so complete that Dreed could hear the standby lights humming. And Ledger, having said what he came to say, closed his eyes. Just closed them. Lying in the open, 4 meters from the lower jaw of an apex predator, the old dog let its half-lidded gaze go all the way shut, and let out a long, slow breath through its nose, and settled its chin more comfortably onto its paws, and went, to all appearances, to sleep. Dreed heard Corvin make a sound he had no name for. It was the most dangerous thing the dog could possibly have done, and it was the entire message. A creature that closes its eyes in front of a predator is a creature announcing, with the whole authority of its calm, that the predator is not a threat worth watching, and there is no insult and no reassurance an apex understands more completely than that. The 6 experts had spent 40 days, and the wealth of a squadron trying to make the animal believe it was safe. The dog made the animal believe something the animal needed far more, and could not have been given by anything that wanted it for a weapon. The dog made the animal believe that it, too, could stop watching, That the small, unafraid thing on the floor had the room. That for the length of one breath, and then another, the great animal did not have to be the last thing the valley heard, did not have to hold the whole weight of its own danger up off the floor, did not have to stay ready, because something calm and unafraid and utterly unbothered had lain down in front of it and gone to sleep. And nothing, nothing at all, was coming. The great animal exhaled. It came up out of it from somewhere deep, a long shuddering release that Dreed felt in the floor, 211 days of held breath going out of a body that had not once, in all that time, been allowed to set itself down. And the enormous head sank the last meter to the floor, and the animal lowered itself after it, the vast slate mass of it folding down limb by limb, and it lay down in its ruined paddock 4 meters from a sleeping earth dog, and it put its jaw on the floor, and it was still. Only then did Wren move. She had stood the whole time, small and forgotten at the edge of it, doing nothing, being the thing that did not move. And now, with the animal down and the dog asleep and the enormous silence holding, she walked forward. She did not go to the dog. She walked past the dog, past the place a person with any sense would have stopped, out across the last of the open floor to the great lowered head, and she came up alongside the jaw that had taken most of the rider exalt's arm, the jaw that opened wider than seemed structurally honest, and she stood beside it, small enough that the animal's lowered head was taller than she was, and she looked down at it, and it looked up at her, eyeless, enormous, and neither of them was afraid. She reached out and laid her hand flat on the animal's cheek. That was all. One hand flat on the slate-gray hide above the great hinge of the jaw, resting there, no weight to it, the way you'd lay a hand on a horse to let it know where you were. One tap if you had to write it in a report, if you had to make it fit in a disposition field. One tap. Dreed watched a 23-year-old mop hauler off a dead colony reach out and put one flat hand on the cheek of the animal that 6 of the best in the sector had flown across a system to break. And he watched the animal, the whole-minded, unbroken, mountain-old animal that had refused a rider and a physician and an engineer and a behaviorist and an empath and the finest handler in the Corps. He watched it lean its enormous head, by a degree, by a hand's breadth, into her palm, and close its eyes. Behind him, Dreed heard Warden Marshal Ith Corven, 40 years in the trade, who had put down more good animals than he could count and signed the death of this one in his own hand, make the sound a very large old man makes when a thing he had stopped believing in turns out, after all, to be true. He did not move. Wren had told him not to move, and he did not move, and Dreed understood that the not moving was costing the old warden more than anything had cost him in 40 years, and that he was paying it gladly. The animal breathed, the dog slept. The woman stood with her hand on the great cheek, saying nothing, wanting nothing, and past the repaired dome overhead the first gray of Hesk's dawn had begun to come up, thin and cold and getting warmer, the light that the animal had been meant to die in, coming up now over an animal that was, for the first time in 211 days, asleep. "That's the morning," Wren said quietly, not to Corven, not to Dreed, maybe to the animal, maybe to no one. "First light, that's the one you were supposed to be gone by." She moved her thumb once slow along the slate-gray hide. "You're still here, nothing came." Her voice did not change. It was the same flat, even thing it always was, and that was what made it land the way Corven's flatness landed, the way the dog's stillness landed. "Nothing's coming. Put your head down, I've got it." And the great animal, which had not put its head down for 211 days, put its head down. The disposition team arrived at first light, and the young officer at the head of it, a junior warden named Pell who had drawn the worst duty on the roster and steeled himself all night to carry it out, stopped 3 paces onto the gallery and could not make his report. Pell's whole account of that morning, which Dreed transcribed, was almost useless as a record, and Dreed kept it anyway, because it was the truest thing in the file. Pell had come to oversee the destruction of a Class 3 subject. He had come with the injection rig and the two-warden escort, and the clipboard with the disposition order that Corvin had, in the end, never filed. And he had walked onto the gallery in the thin gold light of Hesk's dawn coming down through the dome, and he had looked into the paddock expecting to find what everyone in the building had found for 211 days. The rut, the fury, the animal on its feet and grinding itself down. He found an apex predator asleep in a pool of sunlight, its great head on the floor, its sides rising and falling slow. He found a black and white earth dog asleep a few meters from it, chin on paws. And he found a small human woman in a gray coverall sitting cross-legged on the paddock floor between them, her back against the animal's lowered shoulder, awake, unhurried, one hand resting flat on the slate-gray hide, watching the sunrise come down through the dome with the mild expression of a person on a porch. Pell said later that his first thought was that the animal was dead, and the woman was mad, and he was watching the aftermath of some tragedy. It took him a long moment to understand that the animal's sides were moving. It took him longer to understand that the woman was leaning against a sleeping apex predator on purpose, and that the apex predator knew she was there and did not mind. He turned to Corvin for orders. Corvin was standing at the rail, with an expression Pell had never seen on him. "Warden Marshal, the disposition order." "There's no disposition order," Corvin said. "There was never a disposition order. Stand your team down and get the rig off my floor before that animal wakes up and smells it." They got the rig off the floor. Word of it went through Hesk faster than any directive, and by mid-morning the gallery was full again, but it was a different fullness than the 6 experts had drawn. The experts had drawn spectators, beings who came to watch a professional do a difficult thing. This drew something else. Beings came and stood at the rail and looked down into the sunlit paddock at the sleeping apex and the sleeping dog and the small human woman, and they did not talk, or they talked in low voices, and they stayed longer than a spectacle warrants, and they came back. Dreed watched Sethari wardens who had carried their colleagues off that same floor on stretchers stand at the rail and look down and go quiet in a way he had no rank to name. The wardency reacted the way large institutions react to a miracle, which is to try immediately to own it. The directive came down within the day over channels Dreed handled, and he read it before Corvin did and felt his stomach drop. It was efficient. It was reasonable. It was, from the wardency's point of view, obvious. Subject 9 had been successfully pacified by a Terran contract auxiliary using proprietary methods. The auxiliary's contract was to be upgraded to a specialist retainer effective immediately. She was to document her methodology for the Corps, and she was to bring Subject 9 to a state of harness tolerance suitable for saddle fitting within 30 days, at which point the squadron-priced asset would at last enter the service it had been purchased for. The directive congratulated everyone involved. It attached a bonus schedule. It was, in its own terms, a happy ending. Corvin read it and set it down, and said a word Dreed did not transcribe. Wren read it. Dreed brought it down to her himself, because he wanted to be the one who told her rather than have it come off a console, and she read it standing in the sunlit paddock with her hand resting on the animal's shoulder, and when she finished, she handed the slate back and looked at Dreed and said, "So there it is." "I'm sorry," Dreed said. "I should have seen it coming. The second it worked, they were always going to try to sell it." Yeah, she was not angry. That was the terrible calm of her. She had known this was coming from the first, had told him so, had gone in anyway. "I told you. The instant a calm animal looks like a useful animal, they want the use. Corvin meant what he said last night, I believe that. But Corvin's one old man and the wardency's the wardency, and the wardency didn't pay a squadron's price to own a pet." She looked down at the animal. It was awake now, its great head resting on the floor, one enormous eyeless side of its face turned up toward her, and it was unmistakably listening. "Here's the thing they don't understand, though. They think I calmed it. They think there's a method, and now they've got the method, so they've got the outcome. They think if they upgrade my contract and hand me a 30-day timeline, the same thing happens on a schedule. She shook her head slowly. There's no method. Or there's a method, but the method is wanting nothing, and you can't put wanting nothing on a directive with a bonus schedule. The second I'm working 30 days toward a saddle, I want something, and it'll know. It knew what all 6 of them wanted. It'll know what I want the day the wardency makes me want it. She met Dreed's eyes. They just took the one thing that made it work and put it in a directive. They killed it. They don't know they killed it yet, but they killed it. Then what do we do? Dreed said, and he noticed he had said we and did not take it back. We tell them the truth, Wren said, and we let the animal tell them the rest. The truth-telling took the form of a demonstration, and the demonstration was the thing that finally broke the wardency's grip, and it broke it not with an argument but with a fact, which was the only thing an institution like the wardency could not overrule. Corvin arranged it because Corvin had grasped, faster than the wardency ever would, what Wren was telling him. He convened a review, a formal one, on the record, with a wardency assessor flown in to certify the asset's readiness and to see the specialist's methodology demonstrated. The assessor was a smooth, high-plated Sethari named Reeve Delegate Asan, who arrived with a contract folio and a saddle-fitting schedule, and the settled confidence of a being who has never in his life stood in a room with anything that could hurt him. He had come to watch the auxiliary demonstrate control of the asset, sign the certification, and take the credit up the chain. "Show me the control," Asan said at the rail, folio open. "The wardency's position is straightforward. If the animal can be brought to a compliant state on demand, it's an asset and it enters service. Demonstrate the compliant state, specialist, and we can all go home." "I can't demonstrate a compliant state," Wren said, "because there isn't one, but I'll show you what there is. Come down to the floor." Asan's confidence flickered. Down to the floor, that's where the animal is. You want to certify the asset, you have to meet the asset. Corvin met it. Greven met it. 6 experts met it. You're asking me to certify a thing you won't stand in a room with. She was already walking to the gate. "Come and meet it, Reeve Delegate, and then sign whatever you like." Dreed watched the wardency assessor discover, in real time, the difference between owning an animal and standing in front of one. Asan came down to the floor because he could not refuse in front of the review without conceding the whole point, and he crossed the apron toward the great slate-gray animal with his folio held in front of him like a shield, and he got about halfway before the animal lifted its head and looked at him, and Asan stopped as though he had walked into glass. "It won't hurt you," Wren said from where she stood beside the animal, one hand on its shoulder. "Not while I'm here and calm, that's true, but look at it, Reeve Delegate, really look. You feel that?" She did not raise her voice. "That drop in your gut, that thing telling you not to take another step, that's the animal reading you and you reading it back and both of you knowing exactly what it could do. You've never felt that before, have you? You've spent your whole career owning things you never had to stand in front of." She let it sit. "Now, the wardency wants me to make that." She nodded at the animal, at the enormous readable danger of it, still there, undiminished, merely at rest, into something a rider straps a saddle onto and takes to a border action. You've now stood closer to it than you ever meant to. Tell me, standing there, with your gut telling you what your folio never did, does that look like a thing that's going to carry a saddle for you?" Asan did not answer. He was looking at the animal, and the animal was looking at him, and every fact that mattered was passing between them without a word. "It'll be calm," Wren went on, quiet, relentless, the flattest and most devastating voice Dreed had ever heard. "It'll be calm as long as nobody in the room wants to use it. The second a rider gets on its back, the second one being climbs onto it meaning to take it into a fight, it'll know, the way it knew what all 6 of your experts wanted, the way it just now knew what you want, standing there clutching that folio. And it'll do what it did to the rider exalt, and it'll be right too, and no auxiliary contract and no bonus schedule and no 30-day timeline will change it, because you cannot make a thing want to be your weapon by paying its handler. It let me near it because I want nothing from it. The instant the wardency makes me want something, I'm the seventh expert, and you've seen how the first 6 went. She took her hand off the animal's shoulder and stepped back from it deliberately, and the animal's head tracked her, and a low sound started somewhere in it, and Asan flinched hard. She put her hand back. The sound stopped. You want to certify what I do? Certify that. It's the only true finding in the whole file. This animal will be at peace exactly as long as no one in the galaxy is trying to use it, and not 1 second longer. Put that in your folio and sign it, and then tell me what an asset like that is worth. Reeve Delegate Asan got off the floor as fast as dignity allowed, and he did not sign the readiness certification, and he did not sign the saddle-fitting schedule. He signed, after a long closed-door session with Corvan that Dreed was not privy to and did not need to be, a different finding entirely, a reclassification. Dreed processed the paperwork himself, and he read the new disposition field many times, because it was the strangest and best thing he ever filed on the subject 9 matter. The field no longer said terminate. It no longer said asset or subject, or the cold designation the animal had carried for 211 days. It said, in the flat language of the Corps, non-serviceable, retained under welfare protocol, handler of record W. Calloway. And then, because someone in the review Dreed always suspected it was Corvan, had insisted on it, a single further line that had no business in a wardency record, and that no assessor would ever be able to explain to an accountant. Animal is not to be made to want anything. The Corps could not leave it there, of course. The Corps was a martial institution, and martial institutions cannot encounter a thing that works without trying to reduce it to a procedure that can be taught to the next intake. And so, within a week of the reclassification, a study team arrived to document the Calloway method, and the study team produced, in time, one of the finest examples of missing the point that Dreed ever had the privilege to file. They were thorough. Dreed gave them that. They observed Wren for days. They measured the distances at which she approached the animal and logged them to the centimeter. They recorded the pace of her walk, the angle of her gaze, the loose, low carriage of her hands, the exact interval at which she moved her thumb along the animal's hide, a slow, steady stroke, roughly 1 pass every 3 seconds, which the animal seemed to find settling. They built a model of it. They named the model. The stroke, at its measured cadence, entered the core behavioral doctrine under the designation calming rhythm, pattern 1, with a diagram, and Dreed watched Sethari wardens practice the cadence on their own forearms, counting under their breath, 3 seconds a pass, as though the animal had been settled by a metronome. They documented the walk-in and made it a protocol. Approach posture. Neutral it was called in the finished doctrine, and it specified the pace, the gaze angle, the empty hands, the failure to slow at the threshold of the danger zone, all of it correct, all of it precisely observed, all of it useless, because the walk-in worked not because of the pace and the gaze, but because Wren genuinely did not care whether the animal charged, and you cannot doctrine a person into genuinely not caring. Dreed watched a junior warden, weeks later, execute the approach posture flawlessly, perfect pace, perfect gaze, perfect empty hands, and get driven back to the gate inside 4 seconds, because the animal read, off the warden's beautifully doctrinal walk, the one thing the doctrine could not remove, which was that the warden desperately wanted the walk to work. The dog defeated them entirely. The study team knew, because Wren told them plainly and because the corridor feeds showed it, that ledger was central to the thing, that the animal had first set itself down not for Wren but for the dog, that the dog going in ahead and lying down in the open was the hinge the whole event turned on. So the study team tried to document the dog. They measured ledger 2. They logged his approach angle and his down posture and the exact placement of his chin on his paws, and they wrote it up, and they concluded, In a passage Dreed read 4 times with his hand over his mouth, that the auxiliary's companion animal produced a hierarchical recognition response in the subject via instinctive apex signaling, and they recommended that the Corps investigate the procurement of similar signaling animals. They tried to procure a signaling animal. That was the part Dreed could not tell without a straight face for years afterward. The Corps put out a requisition, through channels Dreed handled, for Terran quadrupeds of the working companion type suitable for apex signaling duty, and in due course a broker delivered 3 young dogs, real dogs, off a Terran world, healthy and eager and entirely ordinary, and the Corps put the first of them, with great ceremony and full documentation, into the paddock corridor to signal at the animal. The young dog took one look at the 2-ton apex through the grill, did exactly what any sane young animal does at the sight of a predator 10 times its mass, and tried to climb the corridor wall. It was not a signaling animal. It was a puppy, and it was terrified, and it was right to be. The study team logged the failure and did not understand it and requisitioned another dog, and the second dog did the same, and the third, and the study team concluded, at last, in a finding that Dreed considered the single most nearly correct thing the Corps ever wrote about the whole affair while still managing to be entirely wrong. That the apex signaling response cannot be reliably reproduced with procured animals, and appears to require a companion animal of exceptional and possibly unique temperament. Wren, when Dreed read her the finding, laughed for the only time he ever heard her laugh. Exceptional and possibly unique temperament, she said. That's what they wrote. That's what they wrote. He's not exceptional. She reached down and rubbed the old dog's ear, and Ledger leaned into it and closed his eyes. He's a good dog, that's it. That's the whole thing. He's an old good dog off a hard world who spent his life working stock that could kill him, and he learned the way any good dog learns, that you don't panic, you don't fuss. You just be the calm thing in the field and let the big, dumb, dangerous animal work out that you've got it handled. Every stockman's got a dog like him. My grandmother had 4. There's 10,000 of him on every range, on every colony we ever settled, because a world that eats you teaches your animals the same thing it teaches you. She scratched under the graying muzzle. The Corps wants to procure the temperament. You can't procure it. You have to survive a place that grows it. Their puppies are scared of the big animal because their puppies grew up somewhere safe. Ledger's not scared of the big animal because Ledger grew up somewhere that have eaten Ledger, and the big animal isn't the worst thing he's ever faced down, not by half. She looked up at Dreed. That's the part your Corps will never get into a diagram. The dog's not special. The world he comes from is. And there it was, the thing that had been circling Dreed since the first morning, the thing that finally landed. He had spent 41 days watching 6 of the most credentialed beings in the sector fail to control an apex predator, and then a mop hauler and her old dog had settled it in a night, and he had kept trying to understand it as a difference in skill, a technique the humans had that the Sethari lacked. It was not a technique. It was where they came from. The Corps bred its war beasts on managed worlds and broke them in managed facilities, and could not, for all its expertise, produce a single animal or a single handler, with the one quality the Voth apex had been starving for, which was the unbothered calm of a thing that has already, at the root of itself, made its peace with dangerous animals, because it grew up outnumbered by them and outmatched by them and learned, young, that you do not panic and you do not dominate and you do not flee. You simply become the steadiest thing in the field, and let the big, dangerous animal come to you. The Sethari had come up on soft worlds. That was the truth of it, the truth the whole galaxy had gotten backward. They thought of humans as the small, ordinary things, the auxiliaries, the mop haulers, the contract labor you used for the work that had no rank. And humans were small and ordinary. But they came, every one of them, off worlds that had spent 10,000 years trying to kill them and failing. Worlds that ate the careless and the loud and the frightened, until the ones that were left were the ones who could stand in a field full of things that could fold a ground car and not raise their voice. And they had brought their animals up the same hard way, so that even the pets, even the old graying stock dog asleep in a corridor, carried in them the plain, unhurried authority of a survivor of a place that the rest of the galaxy would not last a season on. Humanity had not sent a soldier to Hesk. It had sent a mop hauler and her dog, and the mop hauler and her dog had walked in and settled, in a single quiet night. The thing that the finest the sector could field had bled itself against for 40 days, not with a weapon, not with a machine, not with a drug or a mind touch or 40 years of the core hardest art, but with the one thing none of them had and none of them could procure, which was the calm of a creature raised somewhere. That calm was the only thing that kept you alive. "You people are the death world," Dreed said slowly. It came out of him almost without permission. "That's it, isn't it? We keep calling that animal the death world apex, the heavy world predator, the thing from the valley that eats everything. And it took one look at your dog and lay down. Because your dog is from a death world too. You all are, the whole species. You come off worlds worse than Voth and you don't even notice, and you bring your pets, your ordinary boring pets, and your ordinary boring pets are apex predators, and you've got no idea, because to you he's just a good old dog." Ren looked at him for a while. "He is just a good old dog," she said. "That's what none of you can hold in your heads. Both things are true. He's just a good old dog, and he's the most dangerous calm thing in this building, and there's no contradiction. And the day your core understands there's no contradiction is the day it stops trying to procure him." She stood, and the dog stood with her, and the great animal in the paddock lifted its head to watch them, unhurried, at peace. "We didn't send you our soldiers, archivist. We're not at war with you. We sent you our labor and our garbage detail and the folks nobody back home had a use for. And even the folks nobody back home had a use for settled your apex in a night without trying." She almost smiled. "You really don't want to meet the ones we did keep." The animal got a name in the end, and it was Ren who gave it, and the name told Dreed more about the whole business than the study team's entire model. He had asked her, one afternoon in the sunlit paddock, what she called it, because the core still called it Subject 9 on the paperwork, and the paperwork was Dreed's whole life, and it had started to bother him that the thing had no name that fit it. She was sitting against the animal's shoulder with Ledger stretched out in the sun beside her, and the great apex had its head down and its eyes half closed, and she thought about it for a moment. "Barley," she said. Dreed waited for the rest of it. There was no rest of it. "Barley," he repeated. "My grandmother had a bull named Barley. Meanest animal on the range, put 3 hands in the clinic before he was 4, and my grandmother named him Barley because she said a mean animal with a soft name has half a chance of growing into the name, and a mean animal with a mean name never does." She rubbed the great slate cheek with the flat of her hand. "This one's not mean. Never was. But he spent his whole life being called things that meant dangerous, subject, asset, apex, a number. Names that tell him what everybody's afraid he is. Somebody ought to call him something that tells him what he could just get to be." She looked up at Dreed, mild, unbothered. "So, Barley." And the core most fearsome, unbroken apex predator, the 2-ton valley killer out of the deep world of Voth, the animal that had refused a writer and a physician, and an engineer and a behaviorist and an empath and the finest handler in the sector, lay in a pool of Hesk's afternoon sun, and let a young woman rub its cheek and answered, from somewhere deep in the slabs of it, with a low sound that Dreed had come by then to recognize. Because he had heard it more and more over the preceding weeks, and it was not a sound the animal had ever made in its first 200 days. It was the sound of an animal that was, on the whole, content. The thing that finally convinced the last of the doubters happened in the yard, and it happened fast, and Dreed did not see the start of it because he was in his office, but he saw enough of the rest to understand why the warden stopped, after that day, calling Barley an animal and started quietly calling it hers. The Corps kept a working string of lesser war beasts in the adjoining yard, broke, saddled, serviceable, the ordinary stock of the trade, a dozen of them penned under the open dome. They were nothing like barley. They were animals the Corps understood, bred soft-world and broke young, obedient in the way the Corps liked its obedience, which is to say obedient right up until something frightened them past the reach of their training. And on an ordinary afternoon something frightened them. A pressure vessel let go on the far side of the yard, a hard flat crack and a gout of steam, no one hurt by the burst itself, but the sound of it went through the penned string like a current, and a dozen broke war beasts went from serviceable to blind panic in the space of a breath. The pen was not built for a dozen animals hitting it at once. It failed on the third impact, and the string came through it, and Dreed heard the alarm and got to the gallery window in time to see the yard become the thing every handler dreads. A mass of terrified, saddle-broke predators loose in the open with nowhere to run, and a scatter of ground staff between them and the exits. The wardens on duty did what wardens do. They went for the goads and the sonic deterrents and the emergency gates, the whole apparatus of force the Corps trusted, and the whole apparatus of force made it worse, because a panicking animal reads force as one more thing to flee, and the deterrents only turned the stampede back on itself, and the mass of it swung, blind and building, toward the low end of the yard where the auxiliaries worked. There were 4 Terran auxiliaries at the low end, and a young one among them, newer even than the rest, and Dreed saw the boy freeze the way anything freezes in front of a wall of oncoming mass, and he saw the warden's deterrents drive the string straight at the frozen boy, and he opened his mouth to shout a warning that would have done nothing. Wren was already moving. She had been at the paddock with Barley, as she always was, and she came out through the service gate into the yard at a walk, not a run, a walk, the same unhurried ordinary pace she took everywhere, and the old dog came out of the gate a half-stride ahead of her, low and level, and the two of them went into the open yard between the frozen boy and the oncoming string as though they were crossing a paddock to clear a sump. Dreed's whole body seized. He had watched this woman walk toward one apex predator and settle it. He had not imagined she would walk into 12 panicking ones, and neither, plainly, had the wardens, who were shouting at her to clear the yard. She did not clear the yard. She stopped, small and still, a little ahead of the boy, and Ledger went out past her at that same low working angle, out toward the leading edge of the panic, and the old dog did the thing it had done for 10,000 head of brush stock on a world that would have eaten it. It did not bark. It did not lunge. It did not fling itself at the mass. It got to the point of the stampede and it cut across the lead animal's line, low and steady and utterly without fear, and it turned, and it held its ground in front of a war beast 6 times its mass, chin level, eye steady, and it gave the lead animal the one thing that a panicking creature cannot look at and keep panicking. A small, calm, unafraid thing that had already decided the situation was handled. The lead animal broke stride. Dreed saw it happen, the exact instant the blind forward drive of the thing hit the immovable fact of a stock dog that would not move and would not fear it, and the lead animal did what panicking herd predators have done in front of good dogs since before there were words for either. It flinched off its line, and turned, and the ones behind it turned with it, because a stampede has no mind of its own, only a lead animal, and the lead animal had just been told, in the oldest grammar there is, that the calm thing had the field. And behind Wren, filling the service gate, having come to the sound of her going out into the yard, stood Barley. The apex did not enter the yard. It did not need to. It stood in the open gate, 2 tons of slate-gray valley killer, head high, and it was simply present. And the string of broke war beasts, wheeling away from the dog, came around into the scent and the sight and the sheer standing fact of a heavy-world apex predator in the gateway. And every soft-world instinct the Corps had ever bred into them stood up at once and screamed the truth their training had buried, which was that there was something in this yard so far above them that panic was not merely useless but obscene, the way a squabble goes silent when the adult walks in. The string did not stampede past Barley. Nothing that ran on four legs and understood at the root of itself what an apex was would have run toward that gate. They wheeled and they slowed and they milled, the panic draining out of them from two directions at once. The small calm dog turning their lead, the vast calm apex holding their fear, and the wardens who had been about to make it worse with a fresh wave of deterrence, stopped, because a junior officer named Pell, the same Pell who had come to put the animal down and found it asleep in the sun, shouted at them to hold, to cut the deterrence, to do nothing, to be still. They were still. And into the stillness, the young woman walked, unhurried, through the milling string, and she gathered the frozen auxiliary boy by the sleeve and turned him and walked him back toward the gate, past the settling animals, past the old dog that fell in at her heel with its work done, in under the standing shadow of the apex, and the war beasts let them pass, because there was nothing else in the world to do in the presence of that much calm but let it pass. It took the wardens an hour to repen the string, and they did it in the end by leaving Barley standing in the open gate and letting the broke animals settle in the apex's presence until they could be walked back one at a time. The Corps' own war beasts, its serviceable saddle-broke assets, were brought back from blind panic not by the Corps force but by the standing calm of the animal the Corps had signed to destroy, and by a 40-pound earth dog, and by a mop hauler who had walked into a stampede at the pace of a woman going to check a drain. That was the day the warden stopped arguing. Dreed filed the incident, no casualties, he wrote again, and by now the phrase had stopped surprising him, because he had begun to understand that no casualties was not luck. It was the whole nature of the thing, that calm does not produce casualties, that the entire body count of the subject 9 matter, start to finish. 40 days of experts and 200 of fury and 1 stampede was 0, and that this was the most damning verdict possible on every method the Corps had tried. Because every method the Corps had tried had been built for a world where the answer to a dangerous animal was force, and force fills infirmaries, and calm fills none. They came for our soldiers, Dreed heard one of the older wardens say that evening low in the mess to a table gone quiet. Years back, the coalition, asked Earth for a contingent, expected a fleet. The warden turned his cup in his hands. You know what the humans sent? Labor, custodians, the garbage detail. We laughed about it for a year. He did not laugh now. I watched their garbage detail turn a stampede today with a house pet. I don't want to meet their soldiers. I've changed my mind entirely about wanting to meet their soldiers. Warden Marshal Ith Corvin filed his retirement papers before the season was out, and Dreed processed those too, and they were the last dispositions the old man ever signed. He came down to the paddock on his final morning, in civilian gray instead of the black and brass, and he stood at the rail a long while looking at the animal he had once signed the death of, and Dreed stood with him, because by then the archivist and the warden had become, through the whole strange business, something like friends. 40 years, Corvin said, watching Barley doze in the sun. 40 years I brought them in, broke the ones that could be broke, put down the ones that couldn't, and told myself the whole time there was no third thing, because if there was a third thing then some of the ones I put down didn't have to. He stopped. He was not a man who left sentences unfinished, and he left that one unfinished, and Dreed did not fill it for him. She was right about me. First night, she said everybody in this building wanted a weapon. I'd have told you I wanted the animal's welfare, and I'd have believed it, and I'd have been lying, because under the welfare I wanted the animal to be usable, and the animal knew it, the way it knew everything. He was quiet. Took a mop hauler to show me the difference between wanting an animal to be all right and wanting an animal to be all right so you can use it. 40 years and I never once made that distinction. She made it at 23, standing in a drainage corridor, because that's where she comes from and that's what her whole world taught her before she could walk. She'd say the dog taught her, Dreed said. Corvin almost smiled, which on his cracked leather face was an event. The dog, yes. The dog taught her and her grandmother taught the dog, and a world that ate the careless taught the grandmother all the way down. He straightened. You know what the findings should have said? The one the study team spent a month on. It should have said one line. It should have said, the humans are not dangerous because they are strong. They are dangerous because they are calm, and they are calm because everything that wasn't calm on the worlds they come from is dead. He looked at the sleeping apex. We spent this whole century deciding they were harmless because they're small and quiet, and they do our garbage detail. Small and quiet. As if we'd ever met anything small and quiet that survived a death world by being harmless. He put his hand on the rail one last time, the way he had once put it on the glass, and then he took it off, and he left, and Dreed watched the old warden walk out of the holdfast he had run for a generation with nothing in his hands, which Dreed had come to understand was the highest form the man had. The others came up in the record now, and then, in the months after, the way names do. The writer Exalt kept the arm and lost the tradition. Word came, eventually, that Barath Ostmund had stopped teaching the step methods, that a man whose entire art was I do not ask had discovered, at 4 meters from a lowered head, that there are things that do not care whether you ask, and had not found a way to go on teaching the old certainty with a straight face. Dreed did not think this was a tragedy. Some certainties are worth losing an arm to lose. Physician Adept Dra published, a season later, a monograph on the limits of chemical reduction in heavy world species, and Dreed obtained a copy and read it, and found in its dense, careful prose a single sentence that he understood was about barley without the animal ever being named. There exist nervous systems whose composure is not a chemical state to be induced, but a fact of the organism, and against these our entire pharmacology is the wrong tool, because we are trying to add from outside a thing the animal already possesses in greater measure than we do. Harness engineer Venth sent of all things a message. It came to Corven, but Corven had gone, so it came to the holdfast, so it came, eventually, to Dreed, who handled the comms archive. It was very short. It said, I have thought about the path I did not own. I think I finally understand what it was. It was not a nerve trunk. It was the animal's belief that it was worth surviving. You cannot gate that. Tell the auxiliary she was right, and that an engineer said so, which for an engineer is a form of prayer. Dreed printed it and took it down to Wren, and she read it and folded it and put it in the breast pocket of her coverall, and did not say anything, but she kept it, and Dreed saw it there for weeks after, a soft worn square of paper over a mop hauler's heart. The all-speaker did not send a message, but Dreed heard, through the long, slow channels of the record, that Vaineth had left the war entirely, that the being who could lay calm across a battlefield had stopped selling that gift to armies, and had gone instead to a quiet world to work with the grieving and the wrecked, the individual broken minds rather than the panicking herds, and Dreed thought he understood why. She had reached, once, into a mind that was whole and vast and old, and had asked her for nothing but to be met, and she had not been able to bear being one more visitor who came to use it, and a person does not come back from feeling that and go on selling calm to the people who own the weapons. And Tol Greven, the finest of them, the end of the road, came back. Not to handle the animal. He came back, months later, an old retired handler with no business at Hesk anymore, and he asked to be let onto the gallery, and he stood at the rail and looked down at the sunlit paddock where the animal he had failed to bring in lay dozing beside a young woman and an old dog, and he watched it a long time, and Dreed, who happened to be there, watched him watch it. I told her that night in the corridor, Greven said at last, not turning from the rail. The auxiliary. I told her the animal only needed one quiet person to come near it wanting nothing, and I believed her, and then I walked in there being the one quiet person, and I couldn't do it because I did want something. 40 years and I still wanted to bring it in. It's in the blood. You can't get it out. He was quiet. She didn't want anything, that's the whole of it. I've turned it over 100 times and it's not more complicated than that. The best handler in the sector couldn't stop wanting to handle. A girl who never handled anything in her life just didn't want to, and that was the door. He shook his head slowly. I came back to see it because I wanted to be sure I hadn't dreamed it, that there really is a third thing. 40 years I said there wasn't. He looked down at the animal at peace in the sun. There it is, third thing. I'd have put it down, I'd have called it mercy. He gripped the rail. Good that somebody in the room didn't. He left and he did not come back again, and Dreed filed the visit under nothing, because there was no field for it. Dreed himself did not leave. He had come to the paddock that first morning, an archivist who understood danger the way you understand a manifest, as a thing you read and filed. He was not that anymore. He still filed. It was still his trade, and he was still good at it better now, because he had learned the difference between the things that are records and the things that are not, and a man who knows that difference keeps a truer archive than a man who files everything. But he had started coming down to the floor. He had started over the months to sit sometimes in the sunlit paddock a careful distance from the great animal, saying nothing, wanting nothing, learning slowly, badly, an office creature teaching itself the one thing his whole civilization had never had to learn, how to be, for even a few minutes, the kind of still that the animal recognized. He was not good at it. He wanted things. He was Sethari, and Sethari wanted things, and the animal knew and kept its distance from him, polite, unbothered, a little amused, Dreed sometimes thought, though he knew that was his own mind talking. But once, only once, months in, on an afternoon when he had managed for a whole quarter hour to sit and want genuinely nothing, to be simply an old soft-handed archivist in the sun with no plan and no need. Once, the great animal had lifted its head and looked at him, and had regarded him for a long moment with that eyeless attention that had once turned his bowels to water, and had very slightly let its head back down, counted him, filed him, found him for that 1/4 hour, harmless in the way the animal understood harmless, which was not weak and not small but simply not wanting anything. It was the proudest moment of Ostwin Dreed's life, and he never told anyone, and he never wrote it down. The last true thing happened on an ordinary afternoon, and Dreed was there for it, and it is the thing he tells when he tells any of it, because it is the only part that holds the whole in a single frame. Hesk's white sun was coming down through the repaired dome, and the paddock was warm with it, and the animal called Barley lay in the light with its great head on the floor and its sides moving slow. Ledger, old now and grayer than he had been, was stretched out asleep against the animal's foreleg. The two of them had come to that, over the months, the 40-pound earth-stock dog and the 2-ton Voth apex sleeping in the same patch of sun, the dog tucked into the shelter of a limb that could have ended it without effort, and neither of them thinking anything of it, because the whole thing had been settled between them in a single night and did not need revisiting. And Wren Calloway sat against the animal's shoulder with her cap off and her eyes closed, dozing herself, 3 death-world animals asleep in a pool of alien sunlight, while a station full of Sethari went about the business of a galaxy that still, for the most part, believed that humans were the small, quiet, harmless ones who did the garbage detail. A young warden came onto the gallery, new intake, fresh from certification, who had heard the stories and did not believe them, the way the young never believed the stories. He looked down into the paddock at the sleeping apex and the sleeping dog and the sleeping girl, and he turned to Dreed, who was at the rail, and he said the thing they all said, the thing the whole galaxy said, the thing that Dreed had once believed himself. That's the animal that put 6 specialists to shame, that thing, the young warden almost laughed. It's asleep, and that's just what is that a Terran custodian, and is that a dog? They calmed a Voth apex with a girl and a dog. No, Dreed said. He had filed the whole matter start to finish, 211 days of fury and 40 of experts and 1 night of quiet, and he had learned somewhere in it, the one line the study team never found, and he gave it to the young warden now, mild, unhurried, the flattest and truest thing he knew. They didn't calm it with a girl and a dog. The girl and the dog were never the small, quiet, harmless things. That's the part you'll spend your career getting wrong if you're not careful. He nodded down at the three sleeping shapes in the sun. The most dangerous things on that floor are the two that are asleep. And the safest place in this entire holdfast, right now, the one spot where nothing bad can reach you, is close enough to the apex predator to touch it, as long as you're standing next to the human. The young warden looked down at the paddock for a long time and did not laugh again. Below, in the warm gold light, Barley breathed, and the old dog slept against the foreleg of the thing that 6 of the best in the sector had bled themselves against. And the young woman off the dead colony dozed with her hand resting flat and easy on the great slate shoulder, wanting nothing, sending it nothing new. And the animal that had not put its head down for 211 days kept its head down, and would keep it down now, because at last, and for good, nothing was coming.